Thank you so much to CSEP for hosting us here in the Congress of Peru. We really appreciate you coordinating with us and helping us find a program that's going to be most effective here this week. I'd also like to thank the Office of Protocol for their hospitality and coordinating with our delegates from Washington, D.C. And I'd also like to thank our delegates from Washington, Justin, Ann, and Victoria for taking the time at a very busy time in Washington to come down here to Peru with us on behalf of the House Democracy Partnership. I also want to thank you all for joining us today and the rest of the week. It's a really unique opportunity for the House Democracy Partnership and the Congress of Peru to come together and work together on some very important topics. Before my time at IRI, I was a Hill staffer, so I worked on Capitol Hill just like you all do here in Peru. And I tried to go to as many opportunities as possible to learn more about my job and learn more about how I could be more effective for the members of Congress and also the citizens that I work for on a daily basis. So I really appreciate you all coming here today and the rest of the week. This is meant to be a conversation. It's meant to be an exchange of ideas. So as much as we look forward to presenting to you, we really look forward to hearing from you all about the jobs that you do and the work that you do on a day-to-day basis, as well as ideas for how we can continue to strengthen both the Congress of Peru and the United States House of Representatives through the House Democracy Partnership. So with that, Justin Lean will have some more information about what the House Democracy Partnership is, and then we will go into our program for the rest of the week. Thank you.
Buenos dias. Good morning. I think we're still working on a little technical difficulties getting the slideshow up, so I thought I would start at least by giving a little bit of the history of our House Democracy Partnership work, add a little bit on what Scott was mentioning, and again, thank you all for being here this morning. This is my second time here in Lima, and I'm honored to be representing the House Democracy Partnership. And I do want to also thank, again, our partners at CSEP and the Office of Protocol, and all of you all for taking the time today, as well as our partners at IRI and USAID for organizing this. The House Democracy Partnership has been around since 2006, and we are a unique bipartisan commission of the House that works with the parliaments of around the world, 18 parliaments around the world, to strengthen the legislative institution itself. We have this fundamental belief that democratic nations are strongest when their parliaments are strongest, or when their legislative branch is strongest, because it's the legislative branch that is most in tune with what the people are saying, what the people believe. We are the ones most representative of the people who have elected us. We are unique in how we operate, and that we want to share our experiences. This is not about saying that things have to be done exactly the way they are in the United States. Our system was built for conflict, in fact, and so there are many lessons to be learned by our democratic process. But it's really about shared experiences, shared values, member-to-member relationships, and staff-to-staff relationships, because we all have this common experience and something to learn from each of us. Here in Peru, we've been working since 2009. And it's been a very productive 8 years together. As was mentioned, we've had more than 20 members of Congress and staff come to Washington for programs. In fact, we've done over 25 programs in just these last 8 years, including having left Lima and visiting Arequipa 2 times before with members of Congress to hold a town hall and see what constituents outside the Capitol were feeling. And what they had to say. We've had members of Parliament, most recently in Washington, in December for an IRI program. So it's really a valued experience, a valued partnership. It really, what brings us all together and what binds us together, as different as our experiences may seem in theory, we really are very similar in reality in terms of the types of work we're trying to do for our bosses, for our country, and so we're all struggling together to make our democracies more perfect, and that's a process that's never complete, but it's important that we all keep working on it, and that we are giving something back to our country by taking the time and effort to make the legislature work as well as it can. My boss, Congressman Price, is fond of saying democracy is not just about free and fair elections, and those are vitally important, but it's about what happens between elections. It's about the process of governing. It's about making sure that people's voices are heard. And where does that happen? That happens in the Congress. It's not going to happen as much in the judicial branch or in the executive branch. It's Congress that is always the most representative and the most directly connected to the people. So we really look forward to a productive week here. I want to thank my colleagues as well from Washington who are joining us. Our Congress is meeting this week as well. So it is really a show, a sign of this strong relationship and this strong bond that our bosses allowed us to come here at a time when our Congress is meeting and voting. And so we really look forward to a productive week and to working together. It looks like we're almost out with the slides, so I want to ask Victoria to join me because we're going to go through this first presentation together about how an office is structured. So we thought we'd start by giving you a little bit of background about how our congressional offices are structured, both on a personal office, so a staffer like myself who works and is hired directly by the member of Congress, versus a committee staff, which is serving the full, all the members of that committee, versus a leadership staffer like Victoria, who not only has to answer to the one boss, but serving the entire political caucus at large. So you want to go to the next slide. So first a little about what the U.S. Congress is. So we are a bicameral system where every office essentially operates as its own small business. The only thing that binds us are our rules and our budget. But everything else is up to the member of Congress to decide on their own how they want to structure things. So for Congressman Price, our budget is roughly $1.2 million. That goes to all of our staff in North Carolina and in Washington, D.C., all of our office leases, our computers, our salaries, also the congressman's travel back and forth between his district and Washington, D.C. But it's up to every office to decide how they want to spend that money. The only rule is the cap on the number of employees you can have. But in the House of Representatives, we are all treated equal. In the Senate, your budget is based on the population of your state. So our most populous states, California, Texas, New York, Florida, they have much larger budgets than members from smaller states because they have to have larger staff to represent more people, and more importantly, they have to have many more offices back in their home state, and that's what that budget goes to paying for. So 100 senators, 435 voting members of the House. We do have a couple delegates that sit in the House that represent our territories, so Puerto Rico, American Samoa, the Virgin Islands, where they are allowed to represent their constituents' beliefs, but they are not allowed to vote on the floor of the House. And we are a representative institution that on average is older, whiter, richer, and more male than the population at large, although that is changing in recent years. But generally, Congress has been a place in the U.S. for wealthier people to be able to aspire to because it is more expensive to run for election and re-election. But at our core, we are a staff-run institution. We have over 13,000 staffers, many of whom have been in Congress longer than the members themselves. For myself, I started working in the U.S. House in 2004. That is longer than 80% of the current members of the House of Representatives have been there. So staff are really the key to keeping the train on the tracks. And staff is who's looked to for a lot of institutional knowledge by the members themselves. We also have thousands more support staff at organizations like the Congressional Budget Office and Congressional Research Service and our investigative wing, the General Accountability Office. So we recognize that we have many more resources than other congresses or parliaments around the world, but I think we all are in the same, we're in the same boat together in that fact that these places can't function if staff are not knowledgeable, if staff don't have the resources to advise and to guide the members. Next slide. So this is the typical structure of a House office in the Congress. So I'll give a little bit of what will seem like a weird description, but look at a congressional office as though it was a company. So the member of Congress is really the chairman of the board. This is the person who is accountable to our shareholders, our constituents, but is he involved in the day-to-day running of an office? No, because he or she themselves are running to committee hearings or running to the floor to vote. And so the chief of staff, my role, is really to be the CEO. I'm responsible for all the hiring and firing, I'm responsible for planning the budget, and I'm responsible to advise the congressman on all the matters that are operating before the House. That may be little things like changing the schedule, that may be advising on vote recommendations, it may be advising on who we hire and fire. But ultimately, the chief of staff is responsible for the functionality of the office. Now within that, you've got 4 different flow charts generally. You have your policy staff. So our policy staff is led by a legislative director. That person is responsible for guiding our 5-person legislative staff from start to finish of a bill, initiating ideas, making vote recommendations. And every person on our legislative staff is expected to be an expert in their specific issue areas. So whatever issue area you can think of, whether it's animal welfare or the Justice Department, judiciary, or funding for agriculture, health, education, transportation. Everyone has a very specific set of responsibilities, and that all flows up through our legislative director. And these are the people who are expected to be our experts. That's who the congressman relies on to provide guidance on new initiatives that he should be taking on, but also bills that are being voted on the floor on any given day. These are our policy experts. Then we have our communications staff. This is the person or people who are responsible for both doing intake, so all of the communication the congressman receives from his constituents. It's the legislative correspondence job to process all of that and to begin to initiate his response to his constituents. We receive and write over 100,000 pieces of mail in any given year from our constituency, and it's the legislative correspondence job to sort through all of that and to begin drafting our responses for all of that. Then that flows up to our communications director, whose job is to make sure that everyone who's in the office is speaking on the same message when we represent the congressman. It's also helping the congressman fine-tune his message himself. Congressman Price was a political science professor before he was a member of Congress, so process is his strong suit. Messaging is not his strong suit. So we rely very heavily on our communications director to shorten what his speeches are, to make them fit into the time constraints that exist in the House of Representatives, and to also add a political flavor to them. It's not just enough sometimes to say the facts, but you need to give a reason why this resonates with the public, why the media should want to cover what you are saying. So our communications director in our office is responsible for being the last set of eyes on every public statement the congressman makes before it goes to the congressman. So it makes sure that we have a consistent message amongst every phase of our staff. Then you have office staff who serve in the professional role of sort of guiding the congressman's day-to-day and hour-to-hour activities. So this includes a personal assistant and scheduler who's responsible for making his travel arrangements, setting up his constituent meetings through the course of the day, as well as his meetings with administration officials or his committees. She's responsible for fitting the pieces of the puzzle together, because in any given day, Congressman Price is scheduled from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. in 15-minute increments throughout the entire day, absent the time that he is forced to be at a committee hearing or on the floor for a vote. So how do we make that whole puzzle fit together so that he can accomplish what he needs to in the course of the day, see as many constituents as he needs to, and if we're lucky, hopefully get lunch at some point during the course of the day as well. And then below our executive assistant is our staff assistant. That is the first person that greets anyone walking into our office. Staff assistants are generally younger. They're generally right out of college. They're also the lowest paid member of the staff, but it is the first step up the chain for almost every member of a congressional office. So I started as a staff assistant 13 years ago. Everyone in my office, including the congressman himself, was a staff assistant at some point. during the course of their congressional career. And so this is a way for you to learn, but it's also the person who's going to interact most directly with our constituents. So if you call our office, it's the staff assistant answering the phone. If you walk into our office, it's the staff assistant who will greet you. She is also the person most responsible for coordinating visits to Washington, D.C. of our constituents. People who want to take a tour of the United States Capitol. They want to take a tour of the White House. They want recommendations on restaurants or hotels. It's the staff assistant's responsibility often to serve as the tour coordinator as well. And then you have a similar structure in our congressional district in North Carolina. You have a district director who is responsible for the hiring and firing of our district staff, of making sure that the congressman's outreach efforts and messaging in our district is getting out to our population, that the newspapers are aware of it, that constituents are aware when we're holding town halls. Congressman Price held 4 town halls this last weekend. It is our district director's responsibility to coordinate all of that amongst the staff and amongst the constituency. And then we have district caseworkers. And those are the people who are interacting with our constituents in North Carolina to learn about what problems they might be having with the federal government. So someone's not getting their veterans benefits or Social Security, the entitlement programs that are supposed to serve everyone. If there's a problem in how that process is working for an individual, it's our caseworkers' responsibility to investigate that and manage that process and really do their best to get our constituents the benefit that they are entitled to and that they have paid taxes for. So that's a little bit of how the staff structure works in a personal office. We'll let Victoria talk a little bit about how it works in a leadership office, because there's a lot more resources and a very different structure and goal at the end of the day.
Buenos dias. Good morning. As Justin mentioned, this is the personal office. So whenever a member of Congress is elected into office, this is their baseline staff they start out with. And there's about 8 folks who, you see the 3 columns on the left. There's about, that's stationed in DC, and then the column on the right, the district staff, that's back in wherever the congressman is representing. And there's about 8 staff members in the columns to the left, and about 6 to 8, would you say, on the right. So this is the base level that congressmen walk into office on their first day. And sometimes it's less than that, and they spend the next couple months staffing up and making sure that they have a good baseline to begin the legislative process with. But as they go along throughout their duration in Congress, they will oftentimes they begin by being appointed to various committees of their choosing, committees of their interest, maybe where their experiences lie, and as they gain more experience, they gain more understanding of the legislative process. Then there becomes some a choosing of the committee chairman or chairwoman, and who will run the committee, and then they are tasked at filling the staff for the committee themselves. So that is a separate but equal staff that both reports to the same member, just as they have the personal office that they also report to. And the same goes for leadership. So if you want to actually go to the next slide, please. And you can see here, we can kind of break down a little bit more in depth of the different roles of the staff. So in the personal office, Justin really covered this one pretty well, but in the committees, we can start there. There's 21 different committees in the U.S. House of Representatives, and these are even broken down. All but 3, the Budget Committee, the Ethics Committee, and House Administration, are broken down into various subcommittees, which are chaired by other various congressmen and women who sit on the Committee of Jurisdiction. So the committee chairman has his personal office that represents his or her district and their needs and the people's voices from the area in which they represent. While simultaneously they have the staff that runs the committee, and the committee is very these staffers are very issue area oriented. So say you have a congressman who is the chairman of agriculture, all of the staff are going to be expert areas in that field, and they're typically a little bit older. They have more experience in their field. oftentimes varies outside of Congress, whereas in the personal offices, as Justin mentioned, you often find folks who started as an intern, they were a staff assistant, they worked their way up in the office, and they oftentimes don't have a diversity of experience outside of the congressional office, but you see a lot more of this expert area in the committee staff. Whenever we're looking at leadership, the majority of the political party that's in the majority at the time we have is run by the speaker, the leader, the whip, and the conference chair. We have 4 leadership positions. The speaker of the House has the vision of where he wants or she wants to take the Congress for that session, and so the legislative goals and priorities. The leader implements those goals, that vision, by setting and setting the calendar for the legislation to be voted on that will fulfill those goals. The whip's duty is to make sure that that he can, we call it whipping the vote. So what it is making sure that the congressional party that's in the majority can coalesce together to get the votes to pass the legislative priorities that are on the House floor. And the conference chair is the communications arm of House leadership. So while the other 3 members of House leadership are planning and organizing and implementing the legislative goals, the conference chair is communicating and messaging these goals to the public on a national level, as well as messaging and coalescing we call it the conference. It's whoever the party that's in the majority, making sure that we are also messaging internally to our internal communications are all on par with each other. So House leadership staff, it also can vary greatly depending on these individual needs of leadership. So the conference chair, whom I work for, being that is the communications arm, we have our personal office who works on the Congresswoman who chairs the Republican conference. Her local goals, just as all that stays the same. That you're always going to have your personal office, but whenever she became the chair of the Republican conference, she gained this extensive staff, and so we have about 20 other folks on staff who push her priorities for communication. So we can specialize in communications in digital media, in media affairs, in social media, in speech writing, these very niche areas of communications, just as the whip's office, for instance, who garners gathering votes. They have a huge department of staffers who work individually with members on the floor and the floor of the House to get these votes, to work with members, to build relationships with them, and as well as to just count votes and make sure that they're getting the votes that they want. So these staffers are they work on a very national level, and it's less locally focused. And it's very, very much tied to the party orientation. We can go to the next slide now. Thanks. Back one, please. And this is just to better break down and differentiate the difference between the DC office and the district office. So the DC office, the core mission is, it's very legislative focused. So it's working on local policy. The member that I work for instance, is from Washington State. It's the West Coast. It is the opposite end of the country to where Washington, D.C. is. And the needs of the people there are very specific, and they're very specialized and individualized to the folks who are living there. It's a very agriculturally based district. We also have a budding technological developments and companies who are positioned there. So a lot of the legislation that we focus on our in our personal office is focused on that. We bring that to to the table to speak about it in a national setting whenever we are discussing it in committee or on the floor of the House. But the DC office is very legislative. The staff is very younger. They're very generalist. They have to be kind of a jack of all trades. Their portfolios can range from anything from agriculture to foreign affairs to tech. And it change very fast. They have to be very adaptable and meet with folks from their district who are coming in on a daily basis to meet with them, educate them on their needs, and so that way we can represent whatever their needs are. It is fulfilling representative government in its totality. So the workflow is determined by the legislative schedule. It's kind of funny, the House calendar is kind of for a congressional staffer, it is how you structure your life in a lot of ways. Whenever the members are in town, that is whenever it's go time. That's whenever we are pushing legislation. We're meeting with members. We're working with constituents who are coming in to discuss their needs, and we're getting our real legislative policy work done. And the political focus still, especially in the personal office, is very local. In the district office, so we have a district office we have 3 district offices actually in Washington State. Washington State is a swath of land that is about 5 hours in diameter. So to best represent all of the folks in their unique needs, we have 3 different offices within our congressional district. And our staff there is a little older. They are constituent or citizen-focused staffers, so they are listening to the needs of the people. They are trying to communicate to them what it is that the work that we're doing in DC and how that affects them, and trying to decipher some of this more complicated policy and trying to articulate it in a way that makes sense for their needs. And the workflow is just really determined by the needs and events in the community. So there is a town hall, if there is a meeting of sheriffs, if there's a meeting of different local organizations, school board, our staff is going out there, hearing what it is that they need, and then bringing that information back to DC so that we can best represent them. And I think we have some time for some questions.
Buenos días. Quisiera consultar cuál es la proporción del personal que trabaja en el Congreso de los Estados Unidos, el personal de planta que hace carrera y el personal que viene con el congresista y que se va con el congresista. Entonces, ¿cuál es la proporción que hay y cuáles son los perfiles que tienen para contratar? Son normalmente personas que son expertas en la materia, comunicadores, sociólogos, administradores, según la necesidad del congresista. Esa es mi pregunta. Gracias. Thank you.
That's a great question. So, everyone in the U.S. Congress that works for a member of Congress, a committee, or leadership directly works 100% at the will of that member of Congress. So, our support structure, Congressional Budget Office, CRS, GAO, these are people who tend to be career employees. It does not matter necessarily who the political change or which party is in the majority at any given time. These people are there to support the institution. But for Victoria and myself, I work specifically for my member. If my member were to lose re-election or to retire, I would be out of a job. The only exception to that is if a member leaves office early, you are able to be retained through the remainder of the year by the clerk, but the clerk of the House manages your office. So from a technical standpoint, I actually legally work for the people of the 4th Congressional District of North Carolina. That just happens to be represented by Congressman Price right now. But if Congressman Price were to retire today, I would still work for the people of the 4th Congressional District of North Carolina. Our sign outside our door would change to say that, and I would be permitted by the clerk of the House to stay on payroll for a period of time while the office until a new member were in place. But we all work directly for the member, and we're being hired for our skill set and our relationship with that member directly. So what our office looks for in hiring younger staff and new staff may not be the same thing that Victoria's office looks for in hiring new staff. So for us, we look first and foremost to, do you have a connection to North Carolina? Ironically, since I run our office, I'm the only person with no connection to North Carolina in our office. I grew up in New York. I had never even been to North Carolina prior to working for Congressman Price, but everyone else on our staff in Washington, D.C. Either grew up in North Carolina or went to university in North Carolina or has family there. And so that's the thing we're looking for first and foremost is, do you have a tie to our state, to our district? Because that helps you connect on a more personal level with everyone who is calling us and who is asking for help. It also means naturally you are paying attention a little bit more to what is going on in state and local politics. So you have a good baseline of knowledge. It also depends on the role you're being hired for. So if you are being hired to be our legislative director, we want you to have a level of experience either within our office or outside on the policy areas that most matter to the congressman. And those are going to be tied to what his committee assignments are. So that's really the things that we're looking for. We're also, when I'm interviewing people, I'm trying to see some type of, it's a guessing game, but some type of promise for the future. An office almost always wants to promote from within for any opening that they have. It means less training that we have to provide. It means that they understand the culture of the office already and what the congressman's priorities are. And so we always look, and that's especially true when we have a limited budget, we look to sort of groom from within and train from within in a House office more so than hiring outside experts. But it really is about the personal connection that someone makes with the member of Congress and what that specific member of Congress is looking for in any given position.
And one thing I'd like to know, and I would be interested to know if this is a similar experience in Peru, is oftentimes I find that staffers on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. are very unique in that they oftentimes come out right out of college, as Justin mentioned. They begin as interns, they begin as staff assistants, and they work their way up within an office. And so you're oftentimes very rarely seeing, if a member of Congress retires, you're very rarely seeing his or her staff will go back home. Oftentimes, whenever a congressional staffer moves out to Washington, D.C., they want to work in politics in one capacity or another. So oftentimes, whenever Hill's offices are looking to, Capitol Hill offices, congressional offices are looking to hire staff, they want staff that already has congressional experience. So it's a bit of a catch-22 whenever you are starting out, but at the same time, once you begin, you see a lot of staffers who have fluctuated between member offices. I've worked in a member office from Illinois, I've worked in a member office from Eastern Washington. I myself am from Texas, but as Justin mentioned, it is very important for most members of Congress to be hiring staff that is from their towns, their districts, because that is the best way to get a pulse on what it is that folks in those areas care about and want and need from their legislators. For leadership staff, I was hired specifically for this member, even though for her leadership office, because of my expertise in digital media, and they then overlooked that I wasn't from the state itself. But you oftentimes do see this kind of wave of congressional staffers being shuffled around and just bringing the institutional knowledge of the Hill to whichever position they end up next.
There's also, after every election, a very quick turnaround in hiring new staffers, or for staffers whose members are retired or have been defeated to find a new job. So our election is always going to be the first week of November, and then the new Congress starts January 3rd under our Constitution. So you're really leaving people about 8 weeks. If their member is departing, you're leaving the staff 8 weeks to try to find a new job. That's not a very long amount of time, especially for staffers who have worked in Congress for a long time. So we all sort of take a chance when we're taking these jobs, especially in personal offices, committee offices, leadership offices, that our members will continue to serve in these positions on every 2 years. And if they don't, then we have to very quickly try to find new jobs. Often on the Hill, as Victoria mentioned, but sometimes you wind up, you just can't find a job that quickly, and you wind up leaving Congress but finding another job in Washington, D.C.
Buenos días, quería dos consultas. Uno, respecto a la estructura de la organización del despacho. Me interesa un poco el tema del cuarto punto con respecto a la organización del distrito electoral. Nosotros tenemos acá coordinadores parlamentarios, cada uno de nuestros distritos electorales, y no hay criterio de selección para poner a estos coordinadores, siendo tan importante, ¿no? Los perfiles, ¿no? En cada uno de los congresistas, teniendo en cuenta que tampoco los congresistas todavía no saben qué comisiones se van a ubicar para hacer su trabajo parlamentario. Y en términos de gestión, es la otra parte de mi pregunta, ¿cómo ustedes tienen algunos indicadores para ver cómo está funcionando, cómo están rindiendo el personal en estos 4 grupos de trabajo que tiene cada despacho parlamentario?
So, on the first question, do you mean how we're hiring people in our district offices, or do you mean the process by which we run a campaign, get elected, and sort of operate as a political entity?
Or do you mean how are the congressional districts actually laid out and devised?
Claro, sí. Me refiero a el personal que trabaja no en campaña, sino ya permanente en los distritos electorales. ¿Correcto?
District staff, as I mentioned, is for the most part, they are professional advocates for our constituents. The backgrounds of a lot of these people who wind up being district representatives, they wind up being former educators, or they wind up being former social workers. People who have a history of working with people to troubleshoot problems, really, or provide guidance. So as a result, most of them wind up being a little bit older and more experienced. Working for a member of Congress in a district is very rarely your first job out of college. In fact, in many cases, it's going to be your last job. We have some staff in our district. We've got 8 staffers in North Carolina. 4 of them intend to retire when Congressman Price retires because they have had other jobs. They've now worked for him for 10 years or so, sometimes longer, and this is the last thing that they intend to do working. So you're looking for people who are resourceful, you're looking for people who really have the pulse of the community. The members of Congress in a year like 2017 where we do not have an election, members of Congress are voting in Washington 38 weeks this year, is that right? 38 weeks. And that means we have very limited time for the members to be in their home districts, whether that's Washington State or North Carolina or New York or Florida or Texas. So you really rely on your district staff to be able to be the face of the member of Congress throughout the district, be able to represent him and her at events. Whether that's giving speeches on his behalf or attending city council meetings and taking notes, sometimes reading prepared remarks. So you're looking for people who are involved in the community already, and you don't necessarily need to train them on how to get involved in the community. They themselves have been local elected officials, and now they're transitioning to a different role, working for a member of Congress. It's hard to sort of pinpoint one specific or two specific items, because again, it's unique to that member, but generally people who have experience guiding or helping other people along in their previous professional career, a little older, a little bit more stable. You know that this is where they live and where they intend to stay is in your congressional district. It's where they've raised their families. It's where they themselves grew up. Things like that. They should have a political calculus as part of it. You want them to have a good political head on their shoulders, but it really at its core is about, do they have the ability to help people navigate a complicated process to get what their needs are in front of a federal agency.
And oftentimes you'll see, during the political campaigns, that the member of Congress or the candidate will recruit folks from the community who know the community very well. So they will use that to their benefit because they're able to campaign with and talk to the people that they're trying to get their votes. So after they've won election, oftentimes that person will they have oftentimes the choice. They can go to DC, but oftentimes they'll stay in the district. And these people are already really well established in the district. They now know that they need a member of Congress, and they also know the congressional district from whatever experience they had prior. So oftentimes you'll see people also recruiting people from their campaigns. As far as management goes, obviously work product is the best factor to know how someone is doing. But whenever you're looking at recruiting, I will say that in Congress, we often take staffers will take other staffers' recommendations very wholeheartedly. So if you have an opening in your office, and as I said, there is a lot of transfer between members, between staff and different member offices. So if there is an opening in one office, say for a legislative position, and you know someone in another office that has a good person who is maybe in a more junior position and is looking to advance their career, oftentimes you'll see folks going over back and forth between member offices because they trust each other and they trust their recommendations, and they're looking to develop people's experience as well. And Justin can also speak to some management experience.
So again, work product is the biggest thing that we're looking for, or I'm looking for as a manager. But I'm also looking for how do you interact with our constituents? How do you represent the congressman when you are interacting with groups or constituents? Or in this day and age of social media, are all of your actions reflecting well on the congressman? Because everything that we do as staff, from our salaries to our travel, it is all public. And I don't want any of my actions to be used potentially in a negative way against the member that I work for when he or she runs for re-election. So, amongst the things I'm looking for is, are there provocative social media posts? Are you, especially right now, are you going on long rants against President Trump as a Democrat. The congressman would not want that of his staff, even as a Democrat himself. He may agree with all of those sentiments, but he doesn't want his staff going on making themselves the story. And so we, as an office, have a social media policy. No one can say anything on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or what have you about politics without the approval of the congressman directly. And so you'll very rarely see anyone on our staff make political statements. But you know, we in our office, we do an annual review every year, every December. I will sit down with every member of our staff individually, and it's a conversation. I want to hear from them about what they perceive as their successes and their failures. I want to hear from them about how myself and the rest of our management team have put them in a position to succeed, or what we could work better at, how I can put them in a better position to succeed. Are there different policy areas that they want to be working on than they currently have in their portfolio? So for our office, we try to make it a constant conversation. We try to not make it really a we don't want the review process to be something that people stress about or that they fear going into. I, growing up in New York, tend to be fairly direct and blunt. If I have a problem with something you are doing, you are going to know that prior to us getting into our annual review. But at the end of the day, work product is the key. Are you writing in the manner and style of the congressman wants? Are you coming up with new legislative ideas? And are your legislative beliefs and policy beliefs aligned with what the congressman's are? And if they're not aligned with what the congressman's are you able to put your personal beliefs aside to provide the right advice to him or her? So again, sort of different for every office, but most offices do have either a semi-annual or annual review process where they're checking in with their staff on a regular basis about what's working or not working for that specific position, but for the office at large. And certainly with the congressman, I mean, he and I talk every day about what the day is, what's working in the day, what's not working in the day. He was a former professor, so he provides notes on every speech that he gets from the staff and edits it as though he's still a professor. And so our staff is very rarely in the dark about where they stand and what they need to work on.
Just to elaborate on one thing that Justin said as far as our staff members accurately reflecting their member of Congress and their legislation and their communications and their beliefs. Capitol Hill staffers, congressional staffers, we really see ourselves as representation of the member of Congress that we work for. We don't see ourselves as a representation of the U.S. Congress as a whole. We see ourselves as a representation of our boss, of our member of Congress that we work for, because our member of Congress sees themselves as representation of the people that they represent. And it's this kind of circular thing, but we really do, as far as, you know, our outward, whether it be social media, whether it be just conducting yourself, you know, in this setting or an even more informal setting, we just always want to be communicating the priorities of our employers.
Hola, quería solamente unas precisiones, porque aquí en el país los congresistas son elegidos por circunscripciones electorales, pero representan a la nación. En la explicación que ustedes nos dan, el congresista está más interesado en atender a su circunscripción, ¿no? Entonces, primero que nos expliquen si, digamos, en qué parte queda, digamos, la representación de la nación. Segundo, de la experiencia que tienen ustedes, nos han comentado que hay varias prácticas en las cuales inciden para que su congresista sea, digamos, tenga una presencia política en su circunscripción. ¿Cuáles son aquellas en las cuales ustedes inciden más y les ha dado resultados, ¿no? Escuché que hacían unos cabildos, unas audiencias, pero nos gustaría saber si ustedes hablan de resultados, objetivos, quería saber si ustedes tienen un pequeño plan de trabajo, algún tipo de planeamiento, si la institución o el grupo parlamentario al cual pertenecen les provee por la importancia del Estado, oye, aquí no hay que descuidar estos aspectos. Y finalmente, la última pregunta está relacionada a lo que inicialmente preguntó mi compañero que me antecedió. Es los resultados. O sea, si bien es cierto, hacemos una primera medición observando al personal que trabaja para nosotros, cómo yo veo si estas acciones afuera en realidad están incidiendo a los beneficios que yo espero obtener, sabiendo de que, por ejemplo, en el caso de Perú, la tasa de reelección no supera el 15% y en Estados Unidos es superior al 90%. Entonces, ¿cuáles son las cosas en las cuales ustedes recomiendan o les ha funcionado, ¿no?
So I'll answer your second and third, and then Justin can elaborate some more. Frankly, there's a lot of discourse, and there's in America right now of people not feeling like their voice is being heard in Congress, that they're not truly being represented by their member of Congress, and so that is something that we're very sensitive to, and something that we want to try to work with our constituencies. And it is challenging whenever you have differing views and you are representing these districts where you have a very similar, it's my member of Congress, for instance, being from Eastern Washington. They're all from similar towns, but it's still a diverse group of people. They all have different views, so it is quite a challenge. But what we do is we mentioned the congressional calendar. So there's 38 weeks that we're in session. Whenever the member is in DC, they fly home every weekend in those weeks. There are within the weeks that they are not in DC, they're back home and they are working ad nauseum as hard as they can as they are in DC with full schedules, meeting with members of with their citizens. They have open office hours where where citizens can come in and can talk to them personally. They have town halls similar to this where folks can air their grievances. Social media has been a huge feedback loop for members of Congress, for citizens to feel like they're being heard, for members to be getting their message out, to informing. I believe there's a disconnect right now of citizens not having a full understanding of what it is that is occurring in DC, and I think that us not being able to bridge that communication gap is what is adding to some of the discourse that I mentioned. But we are trying to utilize these tools, email, even written letter, people calling in, to try to inform folks of what it is that we're doing. But it's you're right. I think that the best indicator of whether or not it's working is whether or not you get reelected. And that is why the political season in Washington, or in America, is so crucial and so critical. And it begins a year before you actually are voting. And that is constituent citizen services too. It's meeting folks, it's done in a different way, but it's still just trying to gain a presence, gain name recognition, and trying to hear the voices and concerns of your citizens.
We also have a unique thing or maybe it's not unique, but in the U.S. Congress, we cannot engage in anything directly political. Now, I know that sounds weird. Our jobs are inherently political, but while on the payroll of the Congress, I cannot take any action to work for the re-election of my member or any other member of Congress for that matter, or work on any other campaign. So if I'm going to do any directly political activity, so we have separate email lists for people who donate to the congressman versus people who live in our congressional district. If I'm going to do anything reaching out to people who have donated to the congressman, I need to do that at home while not being paid for the hours that I do that. if I'm going to go down to his congressional district in the month of October or November or longer, I go off of our congressional payroll and I get paid by our campaign because I can't do both things at the same time. And in fact, when I'm on campaign payroll, I can't respond to my professional job at all. I can't check my emails, I can't interact with our Washington, D.C. staff, and our Washington staff cannot prepare any campaign materials. So it's a delicate balance because, again, it's all about getting reelected and having legislative accomplishments, but we have very strict lines about what we're allowed to do to influence our reelection versus influencing policy decisions in Washington, D.C. To the question of how do you balance sort of local priorities with national priorities? Well, first you hope that those things align. We are struggling right now in the United States because of what's called political gerrymandering, where our maps are drawn for each congressional district, not necessarily in the most geographically sound way, but in the most politically advantageous way. So, for North Carolina, in 2008, President Obama won the state of North Carolina. In 2012, Governor Romney won the state by 30,000 votes. We have 13 members of Congress in North Carolina, but only 3 of them are represented by Democrats. So our congressional district for Congressman Price is 68% Democrats live in his district. That's not necessarily done to benefit him politically, it's done to make the other parts of our state more Republican. And that's done by the state government. And that's true on the other side of the aisle as well. So take New York State, where it's Democrats who are in control. There's only 3 Republicans in the New York State delegation because Democrats get to write the congressional and draw the congressional lines. So that makes it difficult to voice national policies when your local constituency may be at odds with what the national policies are. For us, in a liberal Democratic district, Hillary Clinton won our district by 85% over President Trump. So it's very difficult for Congressman Price to align himself with what some of the national priorities of the Republicans and of President Trump may be, because it's not where our constituency falls. And if at the end of the day, you are trying to advance policy goals, but you can't do that if you're not in office. And so the congressman needs to align his political needs with his policy needs. And you hope that on major issues of national import, acts of war, things related to terrorism, you hope that the Congress can speak in one voice. Certainly on foreign policy, it's a generally held bipartisan belief that we should speak in one voice, and if we're not able to do that, we shouldn't speak at all, because we don't need mixed messages being sent out on foreign policy. But, there are different ways of looking at it. Some members will prioritize the needs of the nation first, then the state, then the local. For Mr. Price, when he looks at trade deals, for instance, he will always look at what is the impact on our local constituency, then what is the impact on our state job, state employment, then what is the impact nationally for a trade deal specifically. For areas of national security, he tends to take a broader view of what does this mean for the nation at large. But there is this constant conflict between serving national goals versus serving local politics and local constituencies, because more often than not, those are not aligned.
One thing to note is, America is a bicameral system. So the U.S. Senate has 2 representatives for the whole state. So that is also something to keep in consideration, that we're only speaking from one side of Congress. The other side is where you're having these 2 representatives for your state. That might also be a little bit more akin to kind of what you are experiencing here in Peru, but that being said, they're still keeping the initiatives of their state, which is much larger than these very small congressional districts, in mind.
Nick, la última pregunta, por favor, antes del receso.
Yo encuentro que hay muchas similitudes entre lo que ustedes nos cuentan, a pesar de las diferencias que hay entre ambos congresos. Por ejemplo, como bien dice, ustedes son un congreso bicameral y nosotros somos unicameral. Por eso es que, proveniendo de la elección de cada distrito electoral, de cada región, digamos, nuestros congresistas al mismo tiempo representan a toda la nación. Lo que vendría a ser, en el caso de ustedes, quizás la Cámara de Senadores, ¿no? Nosotros tenemos las dos cosas en una sola Cámara. A mí me gustaría que ustedes nos pudieran contar la relación que hay entre la parte política, que aquí también lo tenemos en el sentido de los equipos de los parlamentarios, ¿no? Y la parte del equipo institucional, digamos, del personal, que aquí le llamamos del servicio parlamentario. La mayor parte de los que estamos aquí no trabajamos para un congresista, trabajamos para la institución, para el Congreso. Y a diferencia de la parte política que trabaja para los congresistas, y como ustedes es altamente politizada, por ejemplo, en el servicio parlamentario debe ser, por lo menos en teoría, todo lo contrario. Debe ser plural, objetivo, digamos, con una visión más institucional. Me gustaría saber qué proporción de personal tienen ustedes en cada una de estas dos tipos, en la parte política y en la parte institucional propiamente de carrera, y cómo se relacionan ambos recursos en la labor parlamentaria.
And very quickly, do you mind just sharing which kind of capacity that you work for, to give us a little bit more insight into our question as well, our answer?
Lo que pasa es que aquí tenemos 130 congresistas, también cada uno con un equipo parecido al que ustedes nos explicaron al principio. Esto y el personal, que aquí le llamamos personal de confianza, es el personal político que viene con el equipo del congresista, ¿no? Es lo que aquí le llamamos la organización parlamentaria. Pero al mismo tiempo hay como otro sector de trabajadores que somos servidores parlamentarios del Congreso. Es decir, no estamos vinculados directamente a un congresista. Nuestra función tiene que mirar al conjunto del Congreso y deberíamos, en teoría más o menos, estar dispuestos a atender por igual a congresistas de diferentes posiciones políticas, ¿no?
So thank you for that. It's a great question. So we do have amongst, there are roughly 13,000 staffers like Victoria and I, where we are politically tied, we're tied to a member. There are about 3,000 other support staffers who serve administrative functions to make the Congress itself work. So these are people in the clerk's office, people at the Congressional Budget Office who tell us how much money a bill is going to cost, or how much money a tax increase or a tax cut is going to bring in or cost us. We have policy experts at the Congressional Research Service, which is the research wing of Congress. All of these people are there to serve the institution. And the only thing that changes often with them is the head of the entity tends to be the selection of the majority party. So the functions of the clerk's office are going to remain the same whether Democrats or Republicans are in the majority, but the clerk, him or herself, will be chosen by the majority and will change based on who is in the majority. But they are there to make sure that every single process that is necessary to bring a bill from idea to law happens from a technical standpoint. So we have nonpartisan lawyers who help us draft legislation. So I'm not a lawyer by trade, so if I want to initiate a bill, I have two different ways I can do it. I can write it myself, or three different ways. I can write it myself, but I may get a lot of the legal details wrong because I'm not a lawyer. I can ask an outside organization to work on it with me, or I can call the Office of General Counsel, which is staffed by nonpartisan lawyers who will be able to write the law the exact way it needs to be structured. That's especially important for complicated legislation, where you're amending the tax code or things related to national security. You don't want to have to go and change the bill at 2 or 3 times. You want to have it drafted correctly the first time. And then once it gets introduced, there's a whole process that the clerk's office has to undertake, assigning the bill a number, getting it in the online system, making sure that it is properly transferred to the committee or subcommittees of jurisdiction. And all of those people are professional and stay on regardless of who is in control of the majority. And then the same support structure exists on the floor itself. There's a nonpartisan parliamentarian whose job it is to rule on any question or motion brought by a member. And that person, the parliamentarian, will tell the Speaker of the House what he or she must say in order to respond to something. So the Speaker has not just a political responsibility to advance the majority's goals, but an institutional responsibility to listen to the advice of the parliamentarian and make rulings in line with the institution, even if that ruling may go against a member of the majority party. And so all of those people who help make the actual Congress function as a deliberative legislative institution are professional staff hired by the clerk's office and answerable to the clerk for the most part.
And this is an excellent question, and luckily we have Anne Futrell with us, who is from the Congressional Budget Office, who works in a capacity very similar to what you're describing. And tomorrow she'll be able to further articulate some of the processes in making her work not unbiased and nonpartisan, and so something to look forward to tomorrow.
Did that answer your question?
Buenos días. Hace unas semanas tuve la ocasión de repasar después de un tiempo las lecturas de Hamilton, el federalista, que esa es la base para la construcción del Estado norteamericano, y lo hice con entusiasmo porque lo repasaba luego de buen tiempo. Y habían dos temas que me llamaron la atención, si estamos hablando de buenas prácticas parlamentarias. Una de ellas que me dejó con la interrogante es ¿cómo resuelven ustedes como Parlamento la tensión que podría surgir entre la facultad legislativa de los estados federales y las posibilidades de dictar normas a través del Estado Nacional? Esto para mí es interesante porque nosotros no tenemos un Estado federal. Entonces me llamó a un desafío de cómo resuelven este tipo de tensiones, o si no las existen, puede ser. Otro tema que quisiera consultar a los amigos que nos visitan hoy en el Parlamento peruano es conocer sobre cómo han resuelto ustedes el tema de elaboración de enmiendas respecto a su carta política. La carta política de ustedes es una de las más antiguas, si no decir la primera a nivel de América, y nos permite a nosotros seguir la ruta de cómo resuelven las enmiendas. Les contamos un poquito cómo nos pasa a nosotros. He sido un buen tiempo secretaria técnica de la Comisión de Constitución y Reglamento, y en verdad nosotros tenemos una especie de conducta proclive a estar modificando constantemente nuestra Constitución. Me atrevería a decir que no hay un año calendario en este Congreso que no se reforma la Constitución. En lo que va de este gobierno parlamentario, ya se ha modificado 2 veces la Constitución. Una por el derecho de acceso al agua y otra que está todavía en espera de la segunda votación, que es la posibilidad de conseguir la imprescriptibilidad de los delitos cometidos por funcionarios del Estado. Esas serían mis 2 preguntas. Muchas gracias.
So, on the first part about sort of federalism and states' rights versus roles of the federal government, there's not a unanimous answer on that. In fact, that is in some part at the core of what is separating the Republican viewpoint from Democratic viewpoint in Washington, D.C. right now and across the country. The role of states versus the role of the federal government. Some of the roles are specifically defined in the Constitution. However, there is also an amendment in the Constitution that is basically says that anything that Congress has not laid out, or it's not laid out in the Constitution as a role of the federal government, is inherently a right of the state or a role of the state. But there have also been Supreme Court rulings that create a gray area there. For instance, we have something called the Commerce Clause, which says that anything that deals with interstate commerce is the purview of Congress. Well, that's very broad language. You could say energy, water, infrastructure, armed forces, education. I mean, almost anything could be argued is interstate, and therefore Congress would have a role to play in it. Certainly, Democrats tend to take that viewpoint, that it is the role of the federal government to the best that we can, on a national level, set policies that we believe advance the country. Republicans would argue that, and they're right in many instances, that what it takes to advance the country in Texas is different than it is in North Carolina or in Washington or in Florida, and therefore each state should be left on their own to set these rules. That argument follows quite a bit around education policy. It's starting to become more of a conversation about healthcare policy. We don't have an answer for you. I mean, we're constantly, democracy doesn't have cut and dry answers. And our system was, as I mentioned at the top, built for conflict. Our Constitution is written to be full of conflicts and contradictions. And amending the Constitution is a very difficult process. It requires the consent of not just the Congress itself, but the overwhelming majority of states also have to agree to any amendment to the Constitution. And it has to happen within a set period of time. The other way that we can amend our Constitution is to call a constitutional convention. The problem with that is no one ever told us how we're supposed to do that. So we've had two constitutional conventions. The last time was when we established the Constitution. And so, in theory, we have the ability to call another constitutional convention. But nowhere in our law does it lay out the terms for doing that. So that sort of leaves it in Congress's hands inherently for the states to initiate a change. But in theory, citizens should be able to initiate, through a constitutional convention, a process to update and amend our Constitution. But no one's ever set out the terms for that, so it's never happened since the Constitution was created. And then in terms of ruling on whether something is constitutional or not, the Supreme Court is the final arbiter on that. So we have distinctly 3 different branches of government, none of whom has more power than the other. So it is Congress's job to write and pass law, and it is the Supreme Court's responsibility, if asked by the citizens, to rule on whether that law is in line with the Constitution or not. And in many instances, they will say a law violates the Constitution. That can be both at a state level or at a national level. And the Supreme Court's decision is final. Sometimes Congress will, or a state, will take the guidance of the Supreme Court and try to amend their law to better comply with the ruling. But at the end of the day, any law is up to the Supreme Court for interpretation of its constitutionality.
And I have to give my admiration that you read the Federalist Papers. I'm an American, I haven't even read it, so that's very impressive. As Justin said, our government is designed in a way it's designed for a two-party system in a way that you have ideas over here and you have ideas over here, and the idea for this conflict is so you can find the best idea in the middle, and you can kind of tease out some of the maybe more extreme, or you're pulling. It's kind of like a checks and balances in itself, because hopefully that the two are trying to put forth the best idea. And as he also mentioned, the separation between national and state level involvement is a capstone for our two-party system, the Republicans and Democrats, and there is no set idea of what is best, but hopefully I think it's something somewhere maybe in the middle, but it's an excellent question.
I will preface this by saying this will be very in the weeds. It may sound complicated. I would ask that you would hold questions to the end, but if there is something very important that comes up, please feel free to chime in. If you can go to the next slide, there's going to be 6 overarching processes that I will talk about. The drafting and introduction of a bill being referred to a committee, the committee acting on the bill, the House then acting on the bill on the floor, what's called a conference committee, which is where we negotiate differences in legislation between the House and the Senate, and then how the President can act on a bill. Next slide. So if we start with sort of how does a bill get generated? Anyone may draft legislation. Anyone can bring to a member of Congress an idea on something that they believe should be turned into federal law. But only a member of Congress may introduce legislation. This includes the President of the United States not being able to introduce legislation. The President may put forward ideas. The President may even submit legislative text to the Congress, but a member of Congress can be the only one to turn that text into a proposed bill and into legislation to be submitted for public review. Bill text, as I mentioned in the last session, is often prepared by nonpartisan counsel or professional committee experts or the aides to a member of Congress themselves can draft legislation if it is fairly straightforward. But the more technical and more detailed a piece of legislation is, the more likely you are to rely on nonpartisan lawyers or the committee staff to provide guidance, because you are often amending numerous sections of pre-existing law and United States code. Once a bill is introduced, it goes to the House clerk. And the House clerk has a number of responsibilities, the first of which is assigning the law a bill number. In our system, we have a publicly searchable website where every piece of legislation that is introduced can be found. And you can search, if you were to go to lis.gov, you can search specifically by a topic for any legislation that's been introduced. You can search by the member of Congress or by the senator, or you can search by the committee of jurisdiction. But every bill that gets introduced is publicly searchable within 1 day of being introduced in the Congress, and always available online. So once a bill number has been assigned, the clerk can do 3 different things. The first of which is send the bill to a committee. Now that can also be sent to more than one committee. if you are dealing with a complicated matter, more than one committee may have jurisdiction over that legislation. Our committee jurisdictional lines are drawn on the way U.S. law is written for oversight of that particular sector. So if you are changing something related to energy policy, the Energy and Commerce Committee is going to, under the House rules, have responsibility for that. If you are changing legal structure within the judiciary itself, the Judiciary Committee will be responsible for that. Or if you want to expend money from the Treasury, the Appropriations Committee is responsible for spending money. So when a bill is introduced, the first thing the clerk will do, or after assigning a bill number, the clerk will determine under the rules what committees have jurisdiction for this bill and can send the bill to those committees. The clerk can also immediately put the bill on the calendar for a vote to occur. Similarly, the clerk can hold the bill at the desk. Those two things are similar, and they serve the same objective, which is to expedite the process and allow the majority to bring an item to the floor for a vote at any time. Once a bill is referred to committee, the committee must act on the bill before the House can vote on it. Or there's a process by which a majority of Congress must put their names on a document saying, we no longer want this bill to sit at committee, we want it to be immediately brought to the floor. We call that a discharge petition. We are discharging the responsibility of this committee as it relates to this bill. And we're immediately placing it on the calendar for a vote. And as I mentioned, bills that do get sent to committee are done so by the advice of the parliamentarian under the House rules. So what happens when a bill does get sent to committee? There are a number of procedural and political tactics that both the majority and the minority have to either slow the process down or expedite the process. One thing that is really important to remember in our system is that a committee is not required to act on a bill. So oftentimes, a tool of the majority is to refer a bill to committee knowing that the committee is not going to act on it, and it kills the bill. A good example of this, when Democrats were in the majority, in the administration of George W. Bush, a number of Democratic House members wanted to impeach the president. However, not a majority of House Democrats nor our leadership believed in that effort. So when a bill was introduced to impeach President Bush, the Democratic leadership sent it to the Judiciary Committee and told the chairman to not act on the bill, therefore killing its legislative process. A tool that the minority has for when a bill is referred to committee is to ask that it be read in its entirety. That can significantly slow the process down. So when the majority does want to advance legislation, especially complicated legislation, or legislation of a national importance, the first step will be holding a public hearing. This will involve bringing in experts, both from within Congress itself and from the outside community, to discuss the merits of the bill. In the case of bills that involve spending money, we will often seek testimony from the Congressional Budget Office, advising Congress on how much this bill is going to either cost the U.S. government or bring in revenue for the U.S. government. The minority party is always allowed at least one witness at a public hearing. All other witnesses are invited by the majority. And a public hearing is a chance to begin the public debate over legislation. Right now in the United States, we have just done this with our health care bill. And we did it through two different committees. The Energy and Commerce Committee and the Ways and Means Committee both have jurisdiction over health care. And so they both held public hearings with experts inside Congress and outside Congress to debate the merits. This process of public hearings can occur either at the subcommittee level or the full committee level, but it rarely occurs at both. And every part of a public hearing gets published in a transcript that is then searchable for congressional staff, members of Congress to access, but the public at large to be able to look at the legislative history of a bill. So if the majority wants to advance a bill, it first must do what's called reporting the bill from committee. This involves holding a public hearing of the committee. Those typically must be announced 48 hours in advance, and the public must be notified that this is going to occur. Once that happens, we go through a process that's called a markup. It is referred to that because pre-internet and computer age, the way we changed a bill was if an amendment passed, we would physically mark up the text and change it. And so we use the term markup to mean any time a committee is voting on advancing legislation. It's also really important to point out the chairman's role and responsibility and strength in this process. If the chairman or chairwoman of a committee does not support the bill, it is virtually impossible to advance it out of committee. Because that would involve members of the majority party voting against the interests of the person they elected to run their committee. And so there can be inherently political risk by going against your chairperson. That is especially true for our most powerful committees, where members have the ability to exact revenge on other members if they wanted to. Next slide. So, if a committee does in fact vote or decide to move forward in the vote process, they hold this markup, and that process lasts as long as there are members still wishing to amend the bill. You will first go through all of the amendments, and both parties are allowed to offer amendments. And under a traditional rule, you would simply go back and forth, majority to minority member, for whose turn it is to offer an amendment. with seniority order being a factor. Once all amendments have been considered, the chairman will call for, are there any other additional amendments? If the answer to that is no, then there are two ways the bill is taken out of committee, either by a voice vote, in which the louder vote of yes or no wins out, or a recorded vote, in which every member of that committee on the record must say whether they are in favor of the bill moving forward or not. If the bill has enough votes to pass, the next step becomes a staff step, and it takes place behind the scenes. And that's writing what we call a report. Every bill that leaves committee and goes to the floor must have a report to accompany it. And that report provides a little bit more of a common sense explanation of what this technical bill may be. It will do so on a paragraph by paragraph basis or section by section basis, so that the public can better understand what this legislation is. The report will also include the legislative history of how this bill came to be. Whether or not it was initiated by previous members, whether or not there have been previous votes on this issue, what this committee's history may be on the bill, or why this bill should go forward. And then it will also include a vote on every amendment that was considered and how that final vote occurred to advance the bill. So every part of our legislative process, there's accountability for the members themselves for how they voted on every aspect of the bill, if they serve on that committee. A key part for the minority is what happens at the very end of the bill, which is the chance to present its own views. These can be concurring views to the majority, but more often than not they are dissenting views, where the minority party gets to lay out its objections to this bill or to the process that has been undertaken. This is generally confined to 1 or 2 pages, but it is still a chance for the minority to get its views on this specific bill on the record, so there can be no doubt about either its support or its opposition. Once that report is finalized, it gets sent to the clerk, and then it also gets published alongside the bill. So if you were to search online for a specific bill that is advanced out of committee, you would also see attached to it online a House report, which would be downloadable and publicly searchable. This process of writing a report can take anywhere from 3 to 5 days to 3 to 5 weeks. And the bill cannot go to the floor until the report is completed. Next slide. So now what happens when the bill is on the House floor? So once all the committees of jurisdiction have had a chance to weigh in, and an amended bill has been filed and the clerk has the report, then the full chamber can consider it. The House, having 435 members, generally follows a set of rules for every individual bill it's going to consider. And that responsibility lies with the Committee on Rules. The Committee on Rules is the most closely aligned to leadership of any committee in Congress. They are there to set the terms of debate as leadership of the majority party wants them. So that'll be recommending a time frame for debate. Either we have 30 minutes or 1 hour or 1 day. That's entirely up to the Committee on Rules to determine. They'll also determine what amendments may be considered during debate. There are limited exceptions to how the amendment process works on the floor. 95% of bills that go to the House floor, the Rules Committee will tell everyone in advance, these are the amendments that we are going to allow for a vote. The only difference is we have 12 bills that fund the federal government. And for those 12 bills, which we call appropriations bills, once the bill is on the floor, we will start reading on page 1, and we will keep reading until we hit the end of the bill. And any member of the House may offer an amendment so long as their amendment falls on the page that the clerk is currently reading. We call that an open rule. Those bills take significantly longer to be considered, and that's why we limit them just to the $1.2 trillion that is the federal budget. Because if we did that process for every bill, we would accomplish virtually nothing in the House. But even under that process, we are adopting a rule that allows for that process. So no serious legislation can be considered on the House floor without the full House first voting on what the terms of debate are through the rule. That is often a party line vote. If the minority party is able to defeat the rule, we have stopped the majority from putting that bill forward, and they have to start the process all over again. In limited instances, if the minority party defeats the rule and another vote associated with it, we can then put forward a bill on the floor, and suddenly the minority's legislation becomes what the agenda is for the day. And so that's why the rule vote is always considered a party line vote. And the leadership calculates how many times did you vote with the party versus vote against the party on these types of votes. One really important detail for the House is amendments must be germane to the bill itself. So if we are debating a bill on providing water to more communities, it would be against the rules for a member to offer an amendment that talks about providing wind energy to all of our constituents, because that is not the direct topic in front of us. In the Senate, if you have 60 senators aligned on anything, they can offer a non-germane amendment to any bill. So those are really important differences between the House and Senate.
Can you explain what germane is?
So a germane piece of bill, germane amendment would mean, is the topic that I'm offering my amendment on identical to the topic we are already debating?
Yeah, that's it. I don't think there's a word for it.
So most legislation considered in the House follows this very strict rule process. This also allows for us as staff to know the exact time frame of consideration. We know if we start at 1 p.m. with debating the rule, and then we vote, and then we start debating the legislation, we can pretty much predict what time we will be done voting on this bill. There is one other process that exists for non-controversial or extremely bipartisan measures. And that is when we agree as a body to suspend the rules. This means that a bill goes directly to the floor for consideration. We are agreeing to limit debate on the measure to sometimes 10, 20, more often 40 minutes. We are agreeing up front that there will be no amendments considered to this bill. But in exchange for that, we are agreeing that we must have a 2/3 vote to pass it. So that really makes it for items that both the majority and the minority agree should move forward in an expedited way. So once a bill passes the House, and in the House of Representatives, we are purely a majority rule system, so 218 votes passes anything. So once the House passes a bill, it gets sent to the Senate via the clerk. The Senate then has two options. They can either accept the bill that the House has sent them, word for word, no changes, or they can take up the bill and begin their own amendment process. And if they are able to get enough votes to amend the bill and then repass it, it gets sent back to the House to start all over again. So then the House is left with basically the same options that the Senate originally had. We can accept the Senate amended bill, word for word, and agree to it. We can, again, further amend and change the bill and send it back to the Senate and see what they will do. Or we can request what's called a conference committee, which is where we take the two bills that have passed both chambers individually and we try to negotiate a compromise measure, resolve the differences between the House and the Senate. If the decision is made to go to conference, the leadership of the two chambers, the majority leadership of the two chambers, will appoint members to serve as their negotiators. Those members typically reside within the committee of jurisdiction over the bill, but sometimes they will be, other members will be appointed if they have their beliefs on this bill more closely aligned to the leadership of the chamber itself. And so if the leadership wants to make sure that its voice is involved in the negotiation, they can appoint other members as well. If we are successful in negotiating a conference report, it gets written and published the same any other bill would out of committee. The conferees themselves, as we call the individual negotiators, will generally write on their own a separate report that serves as what we call the conference statement, where they will lay out either the House negotiators won or the Senate negotiators won, or we scrapped what both sides did and came up with something new. That part is extremely controversial. Under the House rules, if an item was not included in the original House or Senate measure, it is not supposed to make it into a conference report. But more often than not, we have the ability to waive that rule if the conferees believe that a new path forward is the right one and the one designed to get the most votes. Now this new conference measure is sent to both chambers, and they must again re-vote on the bill as a new bill, and it must pass both chambers. So, if we succeed in that process, which we don't as often as we would like these days, and Congress is able to agree on a unified piece of legislation with the same text in both chambers, then the next responsibility lies with the president. Once technical changes have been made by staff, the bill is sent by the clerk to the President of the United States and formally presented. And then the President has 10 days, not counting Sundays or federal holidays, to either sign the measure into law, veto the measure, or do nothing at all. If the President does nothing at all, this typically results in the bill becoming law, but without the President having had to sign it into law and the political realities of sometimes fixing his name to it. The President will often make a statement when he signs or vetoes a bill, explaining the rationale for signing the bill or vetoing the bill. This has also been a controversial practice because many presidents of both parties have used this signing statement as a way to lay out how they intend to apply the law in areas where they differ from the congressional intent on the law. And that's where it becomes really important for us to have well-crafted, legally sound legislation. Because we don't, as a separate and equal branch of government, want the president to have the ability to interpret this bill different from congressional intent. In the instance where the president will veto a measure, which happens fairly infrequently, the bill then gets sent back to Congress, and we have the opportunity to overturn that veto with a 2/3 vote in each chamber. If only one chamber is able to get a 2/3 vote, and the other chamber is not, then the veto has been sustained and we cannot change the president's action. And at the end of the process, if the president has either signed the bill or Congress has overturned the veto, the law is printed and all subsequent laws that it affects are updated with the United States Code, which is our sort of judicial regulations. So that was a very in the weeds description about how our legislative process works. I appreciate that you all stayed awake during it. And I'm happy to answer any questions about the process or about specific pieces of legislation if you may have them.
Buenos días con todos, gracias a Mayra, la jefa de Centro de Capacitación, por esta oportunidad de glosar de la experiencia dada por nuestros colegas del Congreso de los Estados Unidos. La pregunta concreta que quería hacer es la siguiente. Se refirió en un momento que la asignación de un proyecto de ley a los comités que acá vendrán de las comisiones sectoriales las hace el oficial mayor, es decir, un funcionario, contrastándolo con nuestra experiencia en que si bien la propuesta la hace la oficialidad mayor, esto viene con el refrendo de una de las vicepresidencias. Considerando que en el sistema parlamentario de Estados Unidos el oficial mayor es un funcionario designado por la mayoría parlamentaria, quisiera saber si es que no hay, por parte de la minoría, alguna ocasión en que haya habido una protesta porque en el paso inicial del proceso legislativo se ha entendido que determinada indicación de que vaya al comité X o Y puede favorecer o perjudicar el trámite de la ley.
Sure, that's a great question. Our jurisdiction, the role of each committee to provide oversight to a specific sector, judiciary, agriculture, education, is established in the rules of the House themselves. So there's very little room for interpretation from the clerk. What the clerk can do, if he or she believes there is more than one committee responsible for this, is send a bill to more than one committee. But the clerk and the staff of the clerk's office, even though the clerk, him or herself, is voted by the majority, they're there to serve the institutional role, and they realize that. And so because the House rules are explicit about what committee oversees what sector, there's not a lot of what we call gray area for the clerk to interpret where to send this. And similarly, when a bill is being written, if a member believes that one committee will be more favorable to it than another committee, there are ways to write the text in such a way that it gets sent to the committee you want. For certain areas, that's going to be unavoidable. For foreign affairs or defense, sometimes it's going to be impossible to avoid certain committees. But it is possible to try to write a bill in a way that gets sent to a favorable committee of jurisdiction if you amend certain pieces of law but leave out other pieces. You may not have as comprehensive a bill, but you may get it sent to the committee you want it at. But in every instance, the clerk is referring to the rules themselves and the guidance of the parliamentarian, who is nonpartisan, for what committee to send the bill to.
Thank you.
No podía ser aburrida la exposición porque sencillamente los que estamos aquí, yo hablo por mí, este tipo de exposiciones nos fascina, porque tiene que ver con nuestro trabajo diario, tiene que ver con nuestra vida en el Congreso de muchos años y nada, es muy provechoso escucharlo. Habían dos temas que me interesan. El primero de ellos tiene que ver con el modelo bicameral de tratamiento legislativo, en el cual el Senado no está de acuerdo con lo que dice Cámara de Diputados y a partir de ello se genera la comisión mixta. Es el mismo modelo que nosotros como Parlamento hemos estado intentando aprobar hace muchos años y no se logran los votos, el sistema bicameral. La pregunta que yo tendría es, cuando se emite este pronunciamiento por parte de la comisión mixta, generado por los dos líderes de las comisiones originales o jurisdiccionales, como usted le llama, y un tercero que podría ser adherido a este grupo, esa posición es derivada a diputados y luego al Senado. ¿Es firme, inamovible o puede dar lugar nuevamente a que se repita la historia y que pueda nuevamente echar a andar el proceso legislativo? Esa sería mi duda. Otra duda que tengo respecto a lo que le he escuchado es cuando el presidente ejerce el derecho de veto. Remitida la iniciativa legal aprobada por el Congreso al presidente de la República, él tiene dos momentos. Uno de ellos es suscribir la norma y el otro ejercer su derecho de veto. Sin embargo, me pareció escuchar de la traducción que también puede abstenerse. Me gusta ese espacio. ¿Por qué? Nosotros tenemos en nuestro reglamento y en nuestro marco constitucional el esquema por el cual si el presidente de la República se abstiene, es decir, en el plazo normativo no se pronuncia, no dice estoy en contra ni a favor, el Parlamento puede expedir la norma. Entonces, es en ese momento que no sé si no lo seguí o quedó como en duda, pero me gustaría que lo pueda aclarar. Muchas gracias.
Sure, so on your first question about what happens to a conference report, one thing that's important to note is that process can be a very long, drawn-out process. So sometimes, even though a conference has been appointed, the leadership of the House and leadership of the Senate will just initiate a new bill that they think stands a better chance of passing word for word in the other chamber. But when a conference agreement itself is reached, that bill is no longer amendable. So whatever the conference agreement is, that is the exact text that the House and Senate must vote on. The order in which that occurs is made by the leadership of the chambers. When they're of the same party, there's often a coordination between the Speaker of the House and the Senate Majority Leader, and that's usually a political calculation. You want to see first if this bill has enough votes to pass one chamber before you make the other chamber vote on it. More often than not, bills are more difficult to pass in the Senate if they are not bipartisan. And so the leadership of the House or the leadership of the Senate may want the other chamber to go first, rather than take a politically difficult vote on something that still does not stand a chance of passing. But a conference report itself cannot be amended. Any changes would be through a new, similar bill, but new bill having to start the process all over again. In terms of what happens if the president does nothing, the overwhelming majority of the time, 99% of the time, that bill becomes law by the president doing nothing in that 10-day window. There is a limited circumstance built into the Constitution where if Congress sends the president a bill, but then Congress itself recesses, if that 10-day window occurs while Congress is on break, that is considered what we call a pocket veto. So because of that, Congress will often not adjourn itself for such a long window. It is a way to take that tool away from the presidency. This way, if the president wants to actually reject a bill, he must physically veto it. Otherwise, so long as Congress still meets, if the president does nothing, the bill inherently turns into law. That process is actually similar for appointments to either the federal judiciary or to cabinet officials. Most senior officials in the U.S. government are nominated by the president but confirmed by the Senate. And if Congress goes into a formal recess for more than 10 days at a time, the president has the ability to appoint someone to that position without the consent of Congress for 1 year. As a result, Congress no longer goes on 10-day breaks.
Bien, una pregunta más, por favor. Estamos con el tiempo.
¿Alguna otra pregunta?
Le agradezco su explicación y me parece muy interesante los mecanismos para manejar los conflictos, ¿no? Usted ha mencionado varias veces que el sistema se sustenta en el conflicto, pero veo que ustedes tienen mecanismos para resolver esos conflictos que incluso combinan las decisiones en las comisiones ordinarias con el rol que tienen las bancadas al negociar las decisiones. Aquí nuestras bancadas parlamentarias, bueno, no son 2, son 9, son muchas más, pero no tienen un rol tan decisivo en el proceso parlamentario, solamente a través de sus representantes en las comisiones. Pero también me llama la atención que el proceso legislativo tenga una serie de pasos que quizás hacen más difícil que en el Perú la aprobación de normas, ¿no? La aprobación de una norma parece, en la explicación que usted brinda, más larga, más difícil, obliga a mayores negociaciones y a un mayor debate y incluso a mayor participación o consulta a la ciudadanía. Aquí el proceso quizás puede ser mucho más rápido y eso hace que tengamos demasiadas normas y algunas de poca calidad. A mí me gustaría saber si aquí en el Perú, por ejemplo, nosotros tenemos lo que se llama por lo menos en teoría, al inicio de cada año legislativo, las bancadas parlamentarias, la mesa directiva del Congreso, deben formular, incluso el Poder Ejecutivo, cuáles son sus temas prioritarios para decidir en el año. Si es igual en el caso de ustedes al inicio del periodo parlamentario.
Great question. Or two questions. So I'll start with the last first. Yes, at the beginning of the year, the majority will lay out the major themes it wants to legislate on over the course of the year. And those themes generally align with what the party campaign platform was for the election that just occurred. So, are you able to deliver on the promises you made during the election season? In terms of the actual legislative text, though, that may not be initiated until the new Congress begins. So our Congress is a 2-year cycle that always starts on January 3rd. So any bill that does not become a law prior to January 3rd of a new Congress must be reintroduced completely. So you may know well in advance what the priorities of the majority are or what the president's priorities are. But if you can't accomplish them in that 2-year cycle, you have to start the whole process over again. In the instance of Speaker Ryan, who leads the House now, many of his policy ideas he has put forward for a number of years, campaigned on them publicly. He was also the vice presidential nominee for Governor Romney in 2012 on the Republican ticket. So a lot of his ideas are known, but now he has to go through the process of turning them into legislation and then garnering enough votes within his own caucus to pass them. In terms of your first point in question on sort of power structure within the leadership versus committee chairs, our committees themselves used to be much more powerful than the Speaker of the House was. It really only started in the 90s where we centralized power more. And that has continued, for the most part, through today. But in the 70s, 80s, even earlier, if you were the chairman of a powerful committee, so the tax writing committee, the defense committee, the spending committee, in many instances you were more powerful than the leadership. And so you yourself were able to build up your own constituency in Congress of other members to advance your objectives. This was especially true of spending bills. because that's where district-specific or member-specific projects are able to be inserted. What we used to call earmarks, where it's a specific dollar figure assigned to a specific project in a specific district or state. And we say in the bill what those details are. So that gave the chairman of that committee extraordinary power to keep his or her colleagues in line. If you don't want to vote for this bill, I will simply take your project out of it. We did away with that process in 2011. We did away with that process as part of a campaign pledge that the Republicans ran on in 2010. So that allowed the leadership to consolidate power in many ways, and it makes the chairmen themselves a little bit weaker. And it also makes every individual member a little weaker. One of the interesting dynamics that's going on amongst House Republicans right now is that the number of ideas about the path forward within their conference are numerous. And so they are actually divided into a number of divisions themselves, a number of groups themselves. Roughly 40 of them call themselves the Freedom Caucus. They were all elected as Republicans, but they essentially are there only to antagonize the Speaker of the House and the majority, even though they are part of the majority. So that means on any bill where the Speaker knows the Freedom Caucus does not support that bill, spending being a good example, the Speaker is forced to work with Democrats to get 218 votes. Because too many Republicans in his conference will not support his efforts. The same is playing out right now as we debate what's called Obamacare, or our healthcare system. It's not clear at this point whether the majority has enough votes within its own caucus or conference to actually change the law.
Saltar un poco para comentar el procedimiento legislativo en comisiones ordinarias, en vista pues de que también aquí nos han explicado cómo aprueban sus leyes en el Parlamento norteamericano. La función legislativa es innata a los parlamentos y esta función legislativa nos lleva a ver que consiste en proponer, en estudiar, debatir y aprobar leyes. En la dación de la ley, o para la dación de la ley, es necesario seguir un procedimiento legislativo, que es un conjunto de actos, de acciones que concatenadamente se realizan a efectos de lograr la aprobación de una norma. Este proyecto de ley debe ser a iniciativa de quienes tienen competencia para presentarlo. Ya sabemos nosotros, los congresistas, el Poder Ejecutivo, instituciones públicas establecidas en la Constitución, los poderes del Estado, los colegios profesionales, también hay la iniciativa ciudadana según la ley que lo establece. Y bueno, todos quienes tienen competencia pueden proponer una propuesta, una iniciativa legislativa. Esta iniciativa legislativa debe tener ciertos requisitos, ¿no? que lo establece el reglamento del Congreso. Y esto debe contener, siguiente por favor. Bien, primero hablemos sobre las etapas, ¿no? Las etapas de este procedimiento legislativo se inicia con la presentación de la iniciativa legislativa, luego comprende el estudio en comisiones, la publicación del dictamen, el debate en el pleno, la aprobación de doble votación y su promulgación. Ya estábamos nosotros hablando respecto a, siguiente, al proyecto de ley o de resolución legislativa. Y decíamos que estos proyectos de ley pueden ser presentados por quien les compete esa presentación. Son proposiciones parlamentarias presentadas por los congresistas o porque tienen derecho a la iniciativa legislativa. Y la presentación del proyecto de ley es el acto que da inicio al procedimiento legislativo. Siguiente, por favor. Aquí están los requisitos que ya decía, lo establece el reglamento, son los formales, que viene a ser la exposición de motivos, ¿no? Aquí el proyecto tiene que explicar la necesidad de su duración y la fundamentación por qué se requiere la aprobación de esa norma. El efecto de la vigencia que daría este proyecto de ley de ser aprobado en la normatividad vigente. El análisis costo-beneficio, que viene a ser el análisis de los beneficios y de los costos, ¿no? Sociales, económicos, que puede acarrear la norma, y el impacto ambiental si es que la norma lo requiere. Siguiente, por favor. Entre los requisitos especiales están establecidos según el autor, ¿no? Por ejemplo, de los congresistas, ¿no? Estos deben ser presentados por un grupo parlamentario. La Constitución establece la iniciativa legislativa a los legisladores, pero a través del reglamento se ha establecido la canalización de estas iniciativas legislativas a través de los grupos parlamentarios. Y esto obedece a que en su momento hubo una proliferación de presentación de proyectos de ley y se creyó por conveniente establecer este mecanismo de presentación a efectos de que sean deliberados ya previamente en un grupo parlamentario. Bueno, las iniciativas legislativas no deben proponer ni crear o aumentar el gasto. Sabemos de que los congresistas solo tienen iniciativa para su presupuesto, pero no así para cualquier otro proyecto. Cualquier propuesta que genere gasto, esta debe estar debidamente sustentada en la ley de presupuesto aprobada. No pueden proponer viajes del presidente al exterior, aprobación de tratados internacionales, prórroga de estado de sitio, entre otros. No deben incurrir en copia de otros proyectos. Me detengo aquí un poquito porque en realidad con esto se quiere evitar el plagio, lo que nosotros llamamos plagio, es decir, que se copie parte importante de un proyecto de ley o todo el proyecto de ley sin mencionar la fuente. Entonces este problema se ha venido detectando en los últimos tiempos en nuestro Parlamento y es importante comentar. Siguiente, por favor. Cuando el presidente de la República, quien tiene también iniciativa legislativa, al igual que los congresistas, presenta un proyecto de ley, debe ser referendado por el presidente del Consejo de Ministros y, si es necesario también, si lo cree conveniente, por el ministro o ministros de la cartera cuyas materias están contenidas en el proyecto de ley. Esto nos hace ver de que los proyectos de ley deben ser aprobados por Consejo de Ministros. Los proyectos de ley presentados por el presidente pueden versar sobre cualquier asunto y y de manera exclusiva, ¿no? Tiene la exclusividad del presidente para de iniciativa legislativa sobre materia presupuestal, autorización para ausentarse del país, la propuesta de aprobación de tratados internacionales de los cuales el Perú es parte y quieren ya con su aprobación incorporarlos a nuestra normatividad interna, la prórroga de estado de sitio, entre otros aspectos. Siguiente, por favor. Siguiente. El proyecto de ley es presentado y este proyecto de ley se presenta ante la oficina especializada o determinada por la Oficialía Mayor. En esta oficina, previa verificación del cumplimiento de los requisitos formales del proyecto de ley, se verifica el cumplimiento de estos requisitos y se admite, se lo recibe, ¿no? La oficina determinada le coloca el número del proyecto de ley y lo ingresa, ¿no? Se ingresa al portal del Congreso, se publica y es remitido a comisiones. Pero entre este preámbulo que hay, ¿no? Anterior, por favor. Anterior. Entre la publicación y la remisión a las comisiones, ¿no? La Oficialía Mayor, a efectos de remitir el proyecto a comisiones, pone en conocimiento y consulta con la vicepresidencia que se encarga de la definición de proyectos de ley. En este caso es la primera vicepresidencia. Luego de informar a la vicepresidencia, ¿no? Entonces tramita estas iniciativas legislativas a las comisiones. Esta remisión se hace de acuerdo a la competencia, a la materia del proyecto de ley. Entonces ese criterio es el que se utiliza y se tiene cuidado para que los proyectos de ley de la misma materia sean enviados a la misma comisión, a efectos de que al momento de su estudio y dictamen no haya desorden. Entonces la misma comisión debe ver a todos los proyectos de ley que son de su competencia y que la materia lo requiere. Siguiente, por favor. Ya el estudio en comisiones el estudio en comisiones se inicia ya una nueva etapa. La comisión lo recibe, lo ingresa también, ¿no? Lo escanea y debe proceder a verificar la constitucionalidad del cumplimiento de los requisitos y su calificación de admisibilidad. Nosotros en las comisiones utilizamos un informe de admisibilidad, un informe previo de calificación que nos permite, ¿no? En una forma esquemática, determinar si el proyecto debe ser admitido. Esta potestad calificadora que le da la Constitución y el reglamento a los miembros de la comisión, a la comisión que va a dictaminar, permite que ésta pueda de plano rechazar la iniciativa, ¿no? Cuando no cumple formalmente los requisitos previos, sin entrar al fondo, ¿no? Sin entrar al estudio de fondo del proyecto de ley. Esta decisión supone un acuerdo del pleno de la comisión, ¿no? Y el procedimiento es el siguiente. El proyecto de ley llega a la comisión, este proyecto de ley es ingresado y el presidente de la comisión da cuenta de su ingreso a los miembros de la comisión en la siguiente sesión de la comisión. da cuenta del ingreso y a efectos de determinar y debatir su inadmisibilidad, en este caso, ¿no? Su inadmisibilidad. Entonces, en la orden del día ya se debate y si todos están de acuerdo o si la mayoría acuerda, pues se rechaza de plano el proyecto de ley. Este acuerdo se materializa en un decreto de archivamiento que llamamos nosotros, ¿no? En donde de manera somera se ponen los datos del proyecto de ley y las razones por las cuales no se ha declarado el archivo de plano del proyecto de ley. Siguiente, por favor. Ya se han ingresado los proyectos de ley y veamos que ya han sido admitidos en la comisión, ¿no? Han sido admitidos en la comisión. Cada comisión debe elaborar su plan de prioridades, ¿no? Para trabajar los proyectos de ley, pero en base a los criterios y las disposiciones que nos da el reglamento. Es decir, los proyectos de ley del Poder Ejecutivo tienen el carácter de urgentes, así que hay que dictaminarlos antes. Y los proyectos contenidos en la agenda legislativa, que debe ser esta aprobada al inicio de la legislatura. También hay casos en que la Junta de Portavoces toma la decisión de darle prioridad a ciertos proyectos de ley, que en estos casos las comisiones deben proceder a ello. Ya ingresado el proyecto de ley, de inmediato, ¿no? Se debe solicitar las opiniones. Este trámite, que lo ha establecido la práctica parlamentaria y también la necesidad que existe que los temas legislativos tratados en las comisiones tengan la participación de los sectores involucrados y de la ciudadanía que también está interesada en el tema que se quiere legislar, ¿no? Es por eso que se pide opinión, ¿no? La opinión no es un requisito legal, pero sí de práctica parlamentaria. Esta opinión que se solicita a instituciones públicas y privadas, también se puede pedir a expertos en la materia o a organizaciones civiles organizadas, ¿no? Según se requiera recibir información. Entonces es un trámite interno de las comisiones que se ha convertido en una práctica parlamentaria. Sí, por ley se debe solicitar, por ley está establecido que se debe solicitar al mes cuando la propuesta proponga o tenga quiera regular materia tributaria, es decir, exoneraciones, ¿no? Y beneficios tributarios. Entonces, en este caso sí o sí se tiene que solicitar la opinión, que nosotros sabemos ya que esa opinión tiene un término de 30 días para contestar. Si no contesta, se insiste y tiene 7 días para contestar. Si no contesta, procede dictaminar. También se hacen pedidos de información, en el sentido de que es necesario para el estudio del proyecto contar con información que instituciones especializadas o públicas y privadas contienen, ¿no? Respecto a la iniciativa. Entonces, toda estos pedidos de opinión y de información van a coadyuvar a que el trabajo, el estudio del proyecto de ley pueda ser realizado en forma eficiente y en forma integral. Entonces, el estudio de un proyecto de ley, siguiente por favor, siguiente. El estudio del proyecto de ley, ¿no? Requiere reunir información, datos estadísticos, el marco normativo nacional, ¿no? Reunirlo, verificarlo, estudiarlo, la legislación comparada, cómo es que en determinado tema en otros países ha sido regulada, a ver si puede ser aplicada a nuestra realidad, ¿no? Cuando la materia lo requiere, realizar mesas de trabajo. Estas mesas de trabajo son reuniones en las cuales se convoca a las instituciones, a los expertos y con los congresistas y asesores, ¿no? Se debate previamente a la elaboración del dictamen. También realizamos audiencias públicas, pero esto es, ustedes lo hacen al inicio, ¿no? Nosotros lo hacemos si es que se considera necesario, y en estas audiencias públicas se convoca no solo a instituciones y autoridades, sino también a la ciudadanía a través de sus organizaciones, para que expresen su opinión o se manifiesten respecto a una iniciativa legislativa. Siguiente. Ya hemos dicho qué es lo que debe reunir el estudio de un proyecto de ley, ¿no? Entonces, simplemente adicionar de que solo hay un plazo de 30 días hábiles para dictaminar, que en la práctica es muy difícil cumplir, ¿verdad? Entonces hay algunas situaciones por las cuales se puede prorrogar, pero ya no me quiero detener mucho aquí, sino pasar a decir de que el plazo para aprobar un dictamen es de 30 días. Ya la siguiente etapa viene el debate, ¿no? El debate se da en la sesión de la comisión. Previamente se ha trabajado el dictamen, que nosotros llamamos predictamen. Es una propuesta de dictamen que hace la comisión, la presidencia lo trabaja con el personal de la comisión, ¿no? Reuniendo toda esa información, estudiándolo y viendo lo mejor que puede quedar la propuesta. Entonces se presenta el predictamen, se agenda, se cita la sesión y se debate. Este acto de debate del proyecto trae consigo a que se invite al autor de la iniciativa legislativa, ¿no? Llámese congresista, ¿no? Llámese Poder Ejecutivo, al ministro, ¿no? El presidente no asiste, pero sí el ministro de la institución, por ejemplo, del Poder Judicial, su presidente, y etcétera, etcétera, ¿no? Para que sustente su proyecto, para que también, si lo cree, si lo quiere, esté presente en el momento del debate, de la iniciativa. Entonces, se debate el proyecto, ¿no? Los congresistas intervienen, debaten, aceptan, retiran y hacen modificaciones, ¿no? Y queda un texto legal que se aprueba. Y esta aprobación puede ser por unanimidad, o sea, todos los miembros, en la práctica es de todos los miembros presentes, ¿no? Se dice por unanimidad de los miembros presentes, por mayoría, ¿no? La mitad más uno de los presentes. Y bueno, hay dictámenes, no podemos decir que se aprueba por minoría, porque digamos que cuando el dictamen ha sido aprobado por mayoría, entonces puede generar un dictamen en minoría que es elaborado por los congresistas que no estuvieron de acuerdo y que fueron minoría, ¿no? Entonces esas son las clases de dictámenes y las formas de acuerdo en que se toman en una comisión. Siguiente, por favor. El acuerdo que se toma en la comisión, es decir, el dictamen, puede haberse aprobado el texto original del proyecto de ley. Muy pocas veces sucede esto en nuestras comisiones, porque generalmente puede estarse de acuerdo con el texto íntegro de la propuesta, pero también hay que hacerle algunas correcciones de técnica legislativa. Y aquí hago un paréntesis. ¿Por qué? Porque en el departamento de comisiones existe una oficina que se denomina de técnica legislativa, ¿no? Y brinda el apoyo a las comisiones revisando los predictámenes, ¿no? Revisando para que sea aplicada la buena redacción, haya congruencia y salga una ley clara y precisa. Entonces, es importante precisar aquí en este punto de que un proyecto de ley puede ser derivado a una y máximo a dos comisiones. Generalmente derivado a una comisión y cuando lo solicita, ¿no? Alguna comisión, porque debe haber acuerdo de la comisión, el Consejo Directivo puede llegar a una segunda decisión, ¿no? Pero solo a 2 comisiones, máximo. Ya una vez adoptado, el dictamen debe ser firmado por todos los miembros que aprobaron el texto, ¿no? Debe contener la firma, el documento del dictamen debe ser rubricado por su secretario, el secretario de la comisión, ¿no? Y se procede a presentar el dictamen. Se presenta el dictamen ante el área de trámite documental. 3 copias, un original, perdón, 2 copias, y se adjunta la relación de la asistencia, ¿no? Para verificar el quórum y si efectivamente ha sido aprobado por mayoría o por unanimidad, tal como se establece en el contenido del dictamen, ¿no? Siguiente, por favor. Como es el trámite, este es el trámite, el procedimiento en comisiones. Ya trámite documentario, lo recibe, saca copias, de allí se informa a relatoría y sigue su procedimiento hasta que es incorporado en la agenda para ser debatido en el pleno, ¿no? En el pleno ya se debate y según la votación es aprobado, ¿no? Aprobada en el pleno, de allí la autógrafa de ley es enviada al Poder Ejecutivo, al Presidente de la República para que lo promulgue. Pero allí también, al igual que ustedes, el Presidente tiene la facultad de observar la autógrafa de ley, ¿no? Cuando observa la autógrafa de ley, regresa al Congreso y el Congreso la envía nuevamente a la comisión que ha dictaminado esta autógrafa y el dictamen puede acoger las observaciones, ¿no? que es la figura del allanamiento, ¿no? Insistir en su texto original, que es la insistencia, para cuya aprobación se requiere mayoría calificada, ¿no? O si no, incorporar nuevas modificaciones y esto sería la presentación de un nuevo texto, ¿no? Cuya aprobación se realizaría conforme a un proyecto de ley normal. Hasta aquí hemos llegado con el procedimiento de las comisiones, pero me parecía interesante e importante establecer aquí cuál es la vinculación que tiene este procedimiento legislativo con las áreas del servicio parlamentario. Porque las comisiones requieren del apoyo y soporte de diversas unidades para hacer su trabajo. Y quería yo resaltar, ¿no? A esas dependencias, a esas áreas que ayudan a las comisiones, que apoyan a las comisiones para que su trabajo sea eficiente y se mejore la calidad de la ley. Siguiente, por favor. Ya les comenté, siguiente, ya les comenté sobre la Oficina de Técnica Legislativa, ¿no? Que es un gran apoyo y yo considero que con el tiempo debe fortalecerse, debe quizás dársele mayor presencia y que no solo sea a solicitud, ¿no? de la persona que trabajó el dictamen o del presidente de la comisión, sino que sea una práctica parlamentaria, porque de verdad es una ayuda increíble, es un aporte eficaz para la mejora de la ley. Siguiente, por favor. El Departamento de Investigación y Documentación Parlamentaria, ¿no? Que es un gran aliado de las comisiones, los productos que él produce, ¿no? Este departamento, ¿no? Le corresponde atender las necesidades de información de las comisiones, ¿no? Proporciona informes de investigación, ¿no? Las carpetas temáticas, Lourdes siempre llamando, por si acaso hay una carpeta, ¿no? Las carpetas temáticas conteniendo toda clase de información sobre las materias que están siendo vistas en las comisiones. un pedido de información que podemos hacerle también al DIF, antecedentes archivísticos a través del área de archivo, ¿no? Y aquí faltaban los expedientes virtuales, ¿no? Que no solo a las comisiones, sino a todos nos sirven, ¿no? Y ingresando allí podemos nosotros ver la historia del proyecto de ley, de antecedentes del proyecto de ley, que yo creo que coadyuva, ¿no?, al buen trabajo legislativo. El departamento de biblioteca, ni qué decir. Grecia siempre nos está dando información, nos está dando textos que se le solicita, la propia normativa, antecedentes normativos. Es increíble el apoyo que da la Comisión en base a la información que se le solicita, ¿no? La Oficina de Gestión de la Información Estadística también con sus datos y su información estadística, ¿no? El departamento de redacción del diario de debates a través de las transcripciones, de las grabaciones en audio y video, ¿no? Nosotros en las comisiones requerimos pues ver el debate o escuchar el debate para precisar lo que dijo tal o cual congresista, para lo que expresó tal o cual experto, ¿no? Entonces esta área nos proporciona las transcripciones, el audio o el video, ¿no? E incluso de las mesas de trabajo. Entonces sí es un apoyo y un soporte definitivamente valioso, ¿no? El Centro de Capacitación y Estudios Parlamentarios, ¿no? El Centro de Capacitación con sus capacitaciones, con sus publicaciones, con sus conferencias, ¿no? Ese es el apoyo que da directamente al personal que elabora en comisiones y a los congresistas también. Ahora lo estamos viendo en este momento. El Departamento de Participación Ciudadana, ¿no? Que esta unidad orgánica a través del Parlamento virtual y el enlace con la ciudadanía permite que los ciudadanos participen en el procedimiento legislativo. A través de este enlace pueden manifestar su opinión. A mí en la comisión en comisión me ha llegado opiniones, ¿no? Algunas las he incluido en el dictamen, porque merece tomarse en cuenta. Entonces, es un acercamiento, una forma de acercamiento del trabajo legislativo que realiza la comisión con la ciudadanía. La ciudadanía está participando, tiene un foro, tiene un camino por donde ir y acercarse al trabajo legislativo. Siguiente, por favor. Ya para finalizar, ¿no?, y agradeciendo su atención, quiero referirme, siguiente, por favor, al Centro de Capacitación y Estudios Parlamentarios y su influencia en la calidad de las leyes, ¿no? El estudio de las proposiciones legislativas y la necesidad de mejorar la calidad de las leyes que se aprueba en primera instancia en comisiones, ¿no?, para luego pasar al pleno y convertirse en ley, requiere de contar con personal especializado, con perfiles de puesto y capacidades acordes con el trabajo que realizan dentro del procedimiento parlamentario. En una comisión, voy a hacer aquí un preámbulo, un paréntesis, para que nuestros invitados vean, de que en una comisión hay personal del servicio parlamentario que es de planta, ¿no?, conformado que tiene un módulo, ¿no?, secretario técnico, especialista parlamentario, técnico, auxiliar, y la organización, también personal de la organización parlamentaria o de confianza que lleva el presidente a la comisión, ¿no?, y que está conformada también por asesores, por técnicos y auxiliares. Entonces, este personal se confluye, ¿no? El que se mantiene permanente en las comisiones mientras no exista otra disposición es el personal del servicio parlamentario. Entonces, allí el Centro de Capacitación tiene una gran responsabilidad y una gran tarea de capacitar en las materias ¿no?, que corresponde, ¿no?, para que se formen equipos de trabajo, ¿no?, que tengan la suficiente capacidad, todos en el puesto que se desempeñan, en el cargo que se desempeñan, ¿no?, para trabajar por, en este caso, ¿no?, por la calidad de las leyes. Entonces, en este punto ya la capacitación que se está dando y que yo estoy segura de que con el tiempo y con el entusiasmo, ¿no?, se va a poder proporcionar esa clase de preparación y capacitación que requiere nuestro personal para que redunden en la mejora de las leyes. Yo les agradezco su atención. Muchas gracias. ¿Alguien quiere hacer alguna pregunta? Si no, damos paso a nuestro siguiente.
We need them.
Voy a empezar.
Bien, adelante con la pregunta.
Thank you for sharing this information. We appreciate it. At the beginning of your presentation, you had mentioned that there had been a cost-effective analysis that is done for legislation. Can you provide us additional information on who conducts this analysis, and if it's required to be conducted on all pieces of legislation that are voted on by Congress? Thank you.
Bien, respecto al análisis costo-beneficio, es un requisito que el reglamento establece para la presentación de las propuestas de ley. Hasta el momento no existe una metodología aprobada, ¿no?, para que sea empleada e implementada, ¿no?, en la formulación de los proyectos de ley. Se han hecho varios intentos, ¿no?, empezando por los criterios que se debe aplicar al realizar este análisis. Y se partió previamente de una idea en que este análisis costo-beneficio debería ser desde el punto de vista económico, ¿no? Económico, costo, decían, dinero, ¿no?, beneficio, ¿en qué beneficia? Pero a lo largo con el avance del tiempo, con los debates y las propuestas y estos encuentros también que hemos tenido en algún momento con personas que trabajamos en las comisiones y que debemos nosotros aplicar esto, se ha llegado a la conclusión, digamos, de que este análisis costo-beneficio debe hacerse no solo en el aspecto económico, presupuestal, sino social, todo lo que implique la iniciativa legislativa, ¿no? Por ejemplo, ¿no?, en una norma, por ejemplo, de salud, ¿no?, ¿quiénes son los actores que intervienen? ¿No? Puede ser, por ejemplo, el Ministerio de Salud, el Estado, los pacientes, ¿no? ¿Quiénes intervienen? ¿Cuáles son los efectos directos de la norma para estas personas, ¿no? Por ejemplo, no sé, mejor atención, acceso a los medicamentos, qué sé yo, ¿no? Los efectos indirectos, ¿no? ¿Qué otros efectos puede haber? De esta manera, lo que se quiere es que el legislador, al momento de tomar su decisión, tenga una visión práctica, ¿no?, y directa de los beneficios y también de los costos que generaría esta iniciativa. ¿Quién realiza el análisis costo-beneficio? Debería hacerlo el que presente el proyecto, ¿no? Debería hacerlo. Lamentablemente, por falta de una metodología institucionalizada, algunos lo hacen, otros no lo hacen bien, ¿no? Y así estamos. En lo que respecta a los dictámenes, ¿no? Se ha incorporado, ¿no? Este análisis costo-beneficio y algunos hemos aplicado, lo hemos realizado básicamente en las propuestas, todas son importantes, lo que pasa es que unas son de mayor trascendencia para la ciudadanía. Entonces priorizamos en eso, ¿no? Y se hace ese análisis para efectos, como vuelvo a repetir, de que el congresista que debe tomar la decisión de aprobar o no ese dictamen tenga elementos suficientes para tomar su decisión.
Thank you. I have a question about the relationship between the Congress and the President when it comes to submitting legislation. When the President does propose a bill, must Congress take that bill up for consideration? In many countries where our partnership works, they are legally required to consider any bill that the President submits. Is the same true here? And if you could describe a little bit more, you mentioned that only the President may craft the budget or submit the budget. That's very different from our system where the President puts a proposed budget forward, but only Congress may actually set the terms of the budget. Is there any mechanism to amend the budget once the President submits it?
Sí, gracias por la pregunta. Voy a empezar por la última pregunta respecto a la ley de presupuesto, que ya seguramente en su momento la van a tratar con mayor responsabilidad y detenimiento. Pero sí, la ley de presupuesto, el proyecto de ley de presupuesto lo presenta el presidente del Poder Ejecutivo y el Congreso lo debate y sí lo modifica. Es decir, la última palabra la tiene el Congreso, ¿no? Hay una comisión de presupuesto que se dedica especialmente, ¿no? a trabajarlo, a recibir día a día a las autoridades que tienen que sustentar sus partidas presupuestarias y al final emite un dictamen, ¿no? Un dictamen recogiendo lo que considera necesario, ¿no? Y lo somete al pleno para que sea aprobado, y en su momento van a verlo con más detenimiento. Y en relación a la iniciativa legislativa del presidente de la República, hemos dicho de que el presidente tiene iniciativa legislativa sobre cualquier materia y tiene la exclusividad en algunas de ellas, ¿no? El Congreso recibe la presentación de esa iniciativa a través de un oficio, como hemos visto, firmado por el presidente del Consejo de Ministros y también por los ministros cuyas carteras, cuyas materias se relacionan con el proyecto. El Congreso lo recibe y lo establece la Constitución, tiene el carácter de urgente, es decir, hay que darle prioridad, ¿no? Esa es la primera cosa, hay que darle prioridad. Pero eso no obliga al Congreso a aprobarlo, ¿no? Sigue el trámite que cualquier proyecto de ley sigue, ¿no? Es decir, por ejemplo, ya no le pedimos pues opinión al ministerio, ¿no? Porque de repente, porque el ministerio lo está proponiendo y él va a decir, sí, está lindo, precioso, perfecto, ¿no? Pero le podemos pedir información, ¿no? Solicitamos información respecto a tal punto del proyecto que ustedes han indicado y se pide a otras instituciones, ¿no? Entonces hay el debate también y se aprueba como cualquier otro proyecto de ley.
Bien, no sé si hay una pregunta más, por favor. Con esta última pregunta vamos a pasar al último tema. Adelante.
No, yo sería dos. Una, que vamos a un poco ampliar y complementar la respuesta de la autora en materia de análisis costo-beneficio, y otro con respecto a la ley de presupuesto. Sí, en efecto, la exposición de Yasmina, perfecto. El asunto del análisis costo-beneficio es un asunto que viene ya de muchos años. Desde que nosotros ingresamos a los secretarios técnicos hace el año 2003, estamos con la situación de aplicar efectivamente un verdadero análisis costo-beneficio, que es sumamente complejo, donde se tiene que utilizar índices, variables, matemáticas, estadísticas, etc. Situación que no mucho de lo que estamos trabajando en el curso lo manejamos perfectamente. Entonces, lo que se hizo en muchas ocasiones era analizar esta problemática y adaptar una metodología mucho más amigable, mucho más sencilla, y así se hizo, se aprobó lo que se llamó el análisis costo-beneficio legislativo. Era un formato que, antes de profundizar en análisis sumamente complejos y técnicos, se veía más que nada las variables de tipo cualitativo antes que el cuantitativo. Es decir, se determinaban a los actores y cómo es que afectaba la norma en aspectos de bienestar, en aspectos financieros, en aspectos económicos, en aspectos culturales, ¿no es cierto? En aspectos positivos y en aspectos negativos. Se trataba de sincerar la norma. Actualmente se ha conformado, ya se ha hecho un convenio con la Universidad Católica y se está tratando de establecer una nueva metodología. Estamos también, seguimos analizando la problemática para tratar de ver una solución. Existe un proyecto de ley de un congresista que dice que el estudio de análisis costo-beneficio debería hacerlo una oficina especializada, que no solamente vea cuestiones presupuestales, sino también estudios económicos, y que esta oficina de carácter permanente y técnica deberían apoyar y asesorar a los congresistas y a las comisiones en esta materia. Entonces se está estudiando esta posibilidad. Yo creo que coincide un poco con lo que se viene trabajando en Estados Unidos. Me parece que hay una oficina especializada en esta materia. Y a eso apuntamos, ojalá que lleguemos a una solución en esta tema.
Bueno, la parte presupuestal. Solamente quería precisar que en el caso del peruano, la aprobación de la ley de presupuesto tiene un procedimiento especial. Es uno de los 4 procedimientos diferentes que tenemos en aprobación de leyes, y a diferencia de otros proyectos y a diferencia de lo que ocurre en Estados Unidos, tenemos un plazo legal, constitucional, para aprobarlo. La propuesta del Ejecutivo, si es que no se aprueba en ese plazo, se aprueba la propuesta del Ejecutivo. Es una gran diferencia que tenemos. No es como ocurre en el sistema americano. Es un sistema también parecido a un tema de firma de una cheque con 2 firmas mancomunadas. El que gira el cheque es el Poder Ejecutivo, es la propuesta del Ejecutivo, y viene estructurada. El Congreso puede proponer cambios y al final del dictamen el Ejecutivo lo acepta, y si lo acepta sale ya la ley de presupuesto. La otra es la cuenta general, que va bien vinculada, en la cual también hay una propuesta y hay un dictamen de la comisión, y que el Pleno ni siquiera necesita aprobarlo, sino si está vencido el plazo, se aprueba el dictamen de la comisión. Es el único caso en los cuales tenemos nosotros en el Perú que leyes que tienen un plazo perentorio para su aprobación y en el caso que se dé ese plazo y en el Congreso no se pronuncie, se aprueba la propuesta del Ejecutivo. Y yo creo que esto va a ser tocado con mayor detenimiento cuando veamos cómo es el procedimiento para la aprobación de ley, pero quería dejar este punto muy zanjado porque es muy diferente al sistema que ustedes tienen.
Abre una última participación.
Para complementar la completa y amplia presentación que nos ha compartido el jefe del Departamento de Comisiones, la doctora Sánchez, quisiera compartir con ustedes dos peculiaridades del procedimiento legislativo, porque no solamente estamos para compartirles lo que se da en la norma, sino también dificultades y impases que tenemos en el camino, ¿no? Hace algunos años se hizo la modificación reglamentaria para la presentación de iniciativas legislativas. Antiguamente los parlamentarios presentaban en forma individual, es decir, existía el ejercicio individual de la iniciativa legislativa. Teniendo como norte que la calidad de la ley mejore, se previó modificar la presentación de iniciativas legislativas por bancada. Esto supone que los proyectos de ley van a la bancada y se presumía también que debía existir un estudio a nivel de partidos políticos o de grupos parlamentarios de esta iniciativa y a partir de ello se derivara esta iniciativa para las comisiones en debate. Con el tiempo y el balance de 6 años de vigencia de esta reforma reglamentaria se ha podido analizar que en efecto hemos conseguido reducir el número de iniciativas legislativas, un poco superando este esquema de cuanto más leyes tengas, mejor parlamentario eres, ¿no? Olvidándonos que el balance fundamental de la labor parlamentaria debiera ser la calidad de la ley y no la cantidad de normas que se generan. Si bien es cierto no hemos llegado todavía al norte de conseguir, de mejorar la ley como pretendemos, o buscando los niveles de excelencia que nosotros apuntamos, esto ha coadyuvado, ¿no? Otro aspecto que quería compartir del procedimiento legislativo que nosotros tenemos, y es una peculiaridad, no la he visto en ningún otro ámbito. Hemos estado con Yasmina en Chile recientemente en el Senado chileno y tampoco lo tienen, es la posibilidad que la Junta de Portavoces pueda exonerar de dictamen los proyectos de ley y que éstas no pasen por comisión. Pero esto no es la peculiaridad está en que exonerada la comisión de ver un proyecto de ley, en el debate en el pleno del Congreso, este tema deba ser sustentado por el presidente de la comisión que ha sido objeto de exoneración. Me explico. ¿Se imaginan lo complicado que resulta para un presidente de comisión que no ha visto, que no ha estudiado, que no ha aprobado una ley, tener que sustentar, fundamentar, defender una norma a la cual no reconocen? Es como tratar de reconocer a un hijo que no es tuyo. Sin embargo, esta incongruencia del procedimiento la tenemos. Se han generado algunas salidas como que se inhiben de pronunciarse y buscan a alguien que pueda defenderlo, pero es bastante peculiar, ¿no? Y lo quería compartir con ustedes esta mañana. Muchas gracias.
Thank you for a wonderful introduction. As mentioned, I work at the Congressional Budget Office. It is the support services office, along with the Congressional Research Service and the Government Accountability Office to Congress. And I think it was a wonderful transition for the question that was asked in the back row about a specific independent office that does budget analysis of various legislation and proposals that are being considered by Congress, because that's exactly what we do at CBO. So, as mentioned, altogether I've been working at CBO for 10 years in various capacities, and I'm just going to go through a brief introduction to CBO today. We'll discuss our products, our services, and our processes. One thing that I did want to note is that during the previous presentation, the discussion on cost effectiveness was mentioned, but also for social aspect, the impact on social effects. We do not do that at CBO. we specifically focus on the cost or the money effects that might occur if a legislation were enacted and implemented. Next slide, please. So there will be 4 topics that I will discuss during this presentation. I think this might be the wrong actual presentation itself. Could you go back to the previous slide, please? It is the wrong presentation. Should I assist, or there's a presentation called The Introduction to CBO. My Spanish is non-existent, but I did realize that the slide wasn't quite right. We'll get there soon. Thank you. By the way, this presentation is actually available in your folders as well, translated in Spanish. So if we can't find it, I think it's fine that we can.
No, so that's not it. That's the one we just got. So, hold on. General overview. Yes.
Gracias.
Yep.
Ah.
Team effort.
All right. So, as you can please follow along with the presentation in your folder. This presentation will be an introduction to the Congressional Budget Office, also known as CBO, its products, services, and processes. Next slide, please. Thank you. We'll talk about 4 main issues in this presentation. The U.S. budget process and related terminology. I'll briefly go over this subject matter. CBO's mission and structure, CBO's responsibilities and products, and finally, CBO's culture. And understanding on the last presentation of the day, I'll try not to keep you too long. Next slide, please. The U.S. budget process. So the budget process is really divided between 2 key players, Congress and the executive branch, or the president. Congress has the power of the purse, the ability to provide appropriations, as Justin had mentioned. The president must sign off, of course, on these appropriation bills. The Congress can make initial decisions about how to spend on federal programs. through its own annual budget resolution, and it can override the presidential veto. So once the president receives the appropriation bill, if he or she decides to veto the bill, with 2/3 vote, Congress can overturn that overrule of that veto. Next click. The president has authority to propose his or her own budget priorities annually. He or she can veto the spending bills, and finally implement budget decisions through the Office of Management and Budget under the President. The Office of Management and Budget under the President has the authority to implement specifically the budget decisions within each department and agency. The department and agency actually goes out and runs specific programs with the funding, obviously, that was provided. Next slide. This is a very detailed budget timeline. I just wanted to briefly go over, and this is in calendar years from January to December, that we begin the calendar year with the president submitting to Congress his or her budget. And then that happens in early February. This year actually is unique, not too unique actually for an incoming president, in that the president is a little bit delayed in providing his or her budget goals for the year. CBO, Congressional Budget Office, then comes along and submits an analysis of the president's budget. We do our own estimate of the proposals that the president submits each year. So the Office of Management and Budget does an estimate of what they believe the proposals will cost. So that's the executive or the president's side of things. And then we, representing Congress, and the support staff to Congress, will do a re-estimate of those proposals with our own factors, economic factors, and assumptions that we gather. And then just kind of trickling down, Congress will use this information that we provide on the analysis of the president's budget to formulate the concurrent resolution or their own budget. And then trickling down, you'll see we do estimates throughout the year. And at the end of the fiscal year, the president signs or the end of the calendar year, the president signs or vetoes spending bills. Next slide, please. And also to mention with this budget timeline is that it's not strict. We don't hold strict to this timeline throughout the year. It's flexible. As I said, the president's budget has not yet been submitted. Or will be submitted in piecemeal this year, but so next slide, please. Thank you. The budget process is built off of laws, rules, and procedures affecting the proposal and consideration of spending and tax legislation. This has been developed over a cohesive fashion over time. This did not happen at one point that the budget process kind of formulated. All over the next couple of slides, I'll talk about legislation that was enacted to help us in preparing the budget. The layers of process and procedures, as I mentioned, have developed over time. And next click, please. Thank you. The form of these processes and procedures, if you can just go back. Thank you. The form of these processes and procedures have varied, again, have been statutory. They've been through rules and protocols and just roughly through guidelines. I think it's very interesting or important to note that the interpretation of these rules and guidelines varies. And might change based on the intent or the desire to achieve specific goals for legislation. So the interpretation basically can vary, and that's something we consider as well. Next slide, please. So this is just a brief overview of the major legislation that has built our budget process as it stands now. Starting back to 1884, the Anti-Deficiency Act, which basically states that obligations have to be provided, advanced appropriations or funding has to be provided in advance before an agency or department can obligate money for a specific program. So basically, they can't spend money that they don't have, in short. Budget and Accounting Act of 1921 created the Office of Management and Budget, again under the President, and the Government Accountability Office, and it consolidated the budget proposal or process within the President or executive branch. The Congressional Budget and Empowerment Control Act of 1974, which is, again, only 40 years ago, very recent, enhanced the budget capacity in Congress. It basically balanced the power of the budget process in Congress and the legislative and the executive branch. And it created the budget committees and Congressional Budget Office, CBO.